Hello, this is the Stories Beside channel. I release videos every day for you. Subscribe and click the bell.
The snow merrily creaked underfoot, and that familiar sound from her childhood filled her heart with joy. Camille was an optimist by nature, so she looked for the positive in everything around her. On this winter morning, she did not pay attention to the frost, but tried to get to the destination as soon as possible, color not in the chassis, and happy she flew into the salon, followed by a cold cloud penetrated into the warm room. There was no one at the reception, as the staff of the place jokingly called the reception area. But from the hall heard indignant cries of people. It's not the month of May. You can and hurry at the entrance. In the morning, they reported that it is expected to -18. And to me, that's it. 35. Who'd want to do their hair in a freezer like this? Really, let me see. What's the appointment? Camille went to the room where the girls were preparing their tools. Don't bother. It's just me, the oldest of the masters. Emily was sorry to say that Camille had forgotten about you. I'm sorry, but we just can't get used to having a new owner. I'm not surprised. I'm still getting used to the position myself. It's been almost a year. It's like I've been stuck in the past. Emily liked to talk about otherworldly powers and spooky stuff. She immediately took the bait. Oh, guys, I don't know about you, but I often have such a feeling that I know ahead of time what is going to happen in a minute. For example, recently I'm walking down the street, and in front of the car is going. And in my head, the handkerchiefs are already knocking and telling me where this car is going to turn. It's like déjà vu all over again. And there was another incident. Camille did not finish listening to the fascinating story of the master and went through the restroom to her tiny office. It's a small room, no window. It used to be used as a storage room. But when the girl took possession, she decided to convert the room into her own office. The door was open, so she could hear everything that the salon's female employees talked about before the workday began. Jenna decided to express her opinion about the déjà vu effect. Master manicurist and masseuse at the same time. Emily. Everything is elementary. No fantasy. To understand where the car will turn is not difficult. Repeat. That's a rational observation. Emily was outraged, and you know it all, even if I send you to the erudite team. This provocative passage was answered in the same spirit. Emily, I don't understand the irony of your irony. Yes, and I know a lot, because I studied well in school and now I am constantly self-educating. Unlike some people, it wasn't a pebble, it was a cobblestone to an honorable employee. There was an immediate reaction. If you studied so well at school, why are there other people's fingernails here? Why didn't you go to university? Camille realized that a scandal was brewing. She rushed into the hall to defuse the situation. Nice women are doing something. You can probably hear it outside. Until then, Evelyn had said in a mysterious voice. They had awakened Kolu and were now in the beauty parlor of the ancient city, stammering, accustomed to the irreparable happening. Jenna rushed over to Evelyn with a towel, and everyone laughed. Emily remarked peacefully, "Don't mind us, Camille. We are not angry, so to speak, for the purpose of training change in the morning. And then the client will pile up, and there will be no time to have a word with each other. Maybe I'll go organize a cell. There's still time. You guys okay?" That question was directed at everyone except Camille. Jenna and Evelyn nodded their heads like Chinese dummies. In this cold, tea is better heated by the means. I was just baking pineapple yesterday. Appreciate my culinary skills. Jenna pulled an equally small bag out of her miniature purse. Evelyn glanced at the package and wrinkled his nose. Jenna, who are you going to treat? You won't last long on a hint like that. You are our wicked woe. Come on, I'll teach you the proper way to trick or treat. In the recreation room, or simply household for whistling kettle and masters rushed to this sound. They forgot to invite their mistress for tea, but Camille had long since taken no offense at such trifles. She sat down in a vacant chair and thought. For all the apparent benevolence of this small group of women, did not want to recognize her as a hostess. A small salon, and also a cosmetic store nearby inherited the girl from her mother, who tragically died a little over a year ago. The girl herself at first was afraid of the inherited business, and at first was even going to sell the salon, but her grandmother managed to change her mind. But you sell the salon and store money to spend, and then that you will go yourself a piece of bread to get at least in memory of her mother to continue the business she started. Camille struggled for a long time, but then she gave in. All right, Grandma, you've talked me into it. I just don't understand. Why don't you go into such an interesting business yourself? Wendy rolled her eyes. She always did that to impress the person she was talking to. What are you talking about? 60 is too late to start something, and 22 is not too early. I'm barely out of college, and I've got this whole thing coming at me. It's an inheritance. You shouldn't blame your granddaughter for fate, and young age is the best time to start. The woman at this time engaged in conversations with her granddaughter and switched her brain to memories. With a quiet nostalgia in her voice, she said, You know, Camille, when I was still in school, we were told about America by a long-distance captain. He was invited to our class hour. He said that even rich kids in the States were earning pocket money at that time, and they did not boast of their position and took any job. Washing dishes in cafes, delivering newspapers. Grandma, you should remember what it was like under Sir Garak. Everything has changed in half a century, and decaying capitalism has long since penetrated us. Wendy gave a confused nod. Right, you're nice about everything. I'm really stuck somewhere in the past, and I can't get out of it. Camille looked at her grandmother in surprise, because she didn't understand how it was possible to be stuck in a time that had already been lived. But in the last few months, she had been mentally escaping more and more often herself to a place where her parents were still alive. There was something protective in her eyes, and Camille took a deep breath to keep from crying. Evelyn's voice came from the cabin. Where have you been? Tea is ready. Camille shuddered in surprise and looked toward the cabin. Jenna was standing on the doorstep. It's not good to split from the team. You're our hostess, but you're also a human being. Camille felt an unpleasant tingle in her stomach. She hadn't had breakfast today because of her grandmother, and now her empty stomach reminded her of that. Thank you. But Jenna, was still smiling. Denial is not an option, and it's not hard to guess from your eyes that you forgot or just didn't have time to eat today. So put aside false modesty and go ahead. Camille happily drank hot tea and enjoyed the taste of fresh pastries. It crunched so amusingly like the snow under her feet. The girl held the kindling in her hands and smiled. Emily couldn't help herself. Are you treats from Camille? Feel free to try the apple pie. It's Evelyn's specialty. The young salon hostess was warm and cozy with these simple women. She enjoyed eating the pastries, and life-wise Emily thought this girl was just a child. Jenna and Evelyn were also taking their eyes aside. The same thought must have crossed their minds as well. The front door slammed and Emily commanded all the girls, Morning smoke break is over. It's time to get to work. Apparently it's a client who came to me for a haircut. The woman cheerfully got up and disappeared out the door. But she returned a few minutes later, confused and depressed. Camille, who's asking for you? A guy as big as a 204 closet. I've never seen him before. Emily, send him to my office. The girls quickly cleared the table, and only the smell of vanilla reminded of the recent tea party. Camille was waiting for a visitor in her office. From afar, she heard his disgruntled voice. Not used to it. I'm not used to walking through nooks and crannies. Would your mistress please come out? A tall man in his 30s completely covered his size with his body. The entrance to the study. He looked down on Camille as if she were a small insect. The girl lived under this unpleasant gaze, but kept her composure. I'm listening attentively. Is that you, mistress? Not a muscle in the girl's face quivered. She withstood the insolent man's gaze and calmly answered, Yes, I am. And what do not suit you? Not expecting an invitation from the visitors, I plumped into the only chair. Yes, I don't really care. It's just that the subject came up and I was instructed to pass it on. The man froze and looked at Camille's face again. No kidding. You're definitely the hostess. This is not a setup. Were you in the waiting room able to see the license? Our salon operates in full compliance with the law. I don't mind. I don't care that much. but I've never met such a young hostess before. He was still staring unceremoniously at the lady of the house. But there was something in that look that made the girl blush. But the guest did not hurry to state the purpose of his visit. No, it's a real mishap. I was told that the aunt is in charge of everything here. I see a nice lady, but maybe it's for the best. With a pretty girl like that, it'll be easier for us to make a deal. What are you going to negotiate with me? I'm sorry, but I don't have time for idle chatter, so I'll ask you to get to the point. The artist laughed. I like to be asked to get to the point. I'm second to none in that regard, and I can quite satisfy your interest. The insolence of the visitor began to piss him off. Camille picked up the landline phone. The visitor was frightened. What are you up to? I'll call the police and have them remove your presence. Why did you come into my salon? And you're talking nonsense. The man put his huge paw on the girl's arm. Wait, beautiful. Take your time. It's just an excess of feelings. Did you make a hell of an impression on me? I'm here on business. My landlord wants to buy this salon and store. That's impossible. Why not? Because I'm not going to sell my business. This conversation is over. Goodbye. Camille got up from her desk and headed for the exit. But a visitor blocked her way. No, that was not the deal. It's the first time I've ever seen you, and I don't know your boss and don't want to know him. The girl was shaking either from fear or indignation. The visitor pulled off his star cap from his head and wiped his sweating forehead with it. Apparently simple words the girl does not understand. Too bad. Then I'll have to explain more harshly. Listen here, beautiful. My master is a very respected man, and he had an agreement with the former owner of this place. I don't know anything about that. And my mom died. It's been almost a year. Our condolences, but that doesn't change the case. Forgotten landlady and a debt owed. My master doesn't forgive such things. He warned your mother too, but she didn't take it to heart. That's why the meter is counting. But we are not beasts. And my master is ready to buy your salon and store. In a breaking voice, Camille screamed in the face of the scoundrel, I won't sell anything. Don't be in a hurry, Belle. You have a month to think about it. And don't forget that the clock is ticking and the debt is growing. There were lively voices from the hall, interrupted by the sound of merry music. But Camille was shaking with fear. Several times she picked up the phone and put it down again. Evelyn came into the office. Camille, we need to order the compound for the bomb. We're running out of gloves. Oh, what's the matter with you? You don't have a face. No, it's okay, it's okay. Go ahead. I'll be sure to order. For the rest of the day, the girl could think of nothing else but the strange visitor. Her late mother never involved her in her affairs. Her grandmother had shown no interest in the business either, so there was almost nowhere to make inquiries. But Camille at that moment was very much mistaken with her conclusions. The girl was going to ask her grandmother about everything about her parents' business. She only knew that her father had been given some money to start his own business. He decided to start a car repair business because he was good at it. But the business almost immediately stalled, and the man sold the unprofitable enterprise. And Camille's mother persuaded him to give her the proceeds of the sale. Sam, I have a good idea. I've already thought of everything. Camille remembers well how her mother convinced her father in the kitchen that beauty is the most profitable business. The girl was still in the 3rd grade and was too young to understand the essence of the conversation. But she remembered her father's words well. Vanessa, from afar, a tree barely seems like a forest. And when you look closer, you realize that everything is not as it seemed. It's the same thing in business. I also believe that car service will be in great demand. But I made a big mistake. You have to consider scale here. So you're saying that success depends on geography. Of course. There's a direct correlation. And that's where I almost lost money. After all, people in small towns have lower incomes than in a major metropolis. Hence the low purchasing power. Basically, it's nothing new. This is the basis of economics, which you should always remember. Trust me, the same fate awaits your salon. Although your plan is feasible even on the scale of our town. Sam, will you give me the money? What other choice do I have? Of course I will. But you'll have to ask Vanessa to defer the payment. Sam Vanessa is the kindest of people. we're sure she won't refuse you. She's already done so much for us. There's just one thing I don't understand. Why is Mom so prejudiced against her? Vanessa, you know I'm not one for gossip, but the locals say she and Vanessa have a long-standing feud. That's the reason your mother left the regional center and settled in this town, where rich people like to vacation. I can't confirm it, but that's what they say. By the way, I was also hoping for a wealthy clientele who spend a vacation session here. But life has shown that wealthy citizens suffer from pathological greed. I don't agree with you. Only in one thing against female beauty cannot resist even millionaires. That's why salon services are a priority for rich ladies. They know a lot of ways to extort money from a stingy husband. Vanessa, I didn't even realize you were a psychologist. Parents didn't hide from their daughter when discussing business matters. But then, by virtue of her young age, Camille did not understand much of the conversations of adults, and most often information difficult for children's perception flew in one ear and out of the other. But this past year, events began to emerge from the past, which in the reflection of the current day took on a completely different meaning. And it's a conversation my parents had a long time ago. Memory did not randomly give out of its archive either. Camille walked in confusion around the apartment where her happiest years had flown by. Everything here still reminded of her parents and created the illusion of the presence of people dear to her heart. There was only one thought in her brain. Aunt Vanessa, why am I thinking of her now? Vanessa wasn't a frequent visitor to their home, but she always showed up with gifts. Camille disliked the old lady, which displeased his parents. One day, the father decided to find out the reason for his daughter's dislike for her acquaintance. Tell me honestly, why did you rob Aunt Vanessa? After all, she brings you so many gifts. Without thinking, Camille spoke up. She's in the shower, and I don't need her presence. Dad was surprised. What a number. And for some reason, he thought Vanessa was a toy. She has eyes like a witch, and she's not telling the truth. When the grandmother learned about this conclusion of her granddaughter, she told her daughter Vanessa, do not forget that the mouth of a child speaks the truth. Children can sense insincerity from a distance. Unfortunately, this ability fades with age. So, alas, Vanessa's grimaces and sweet words are taken at face value. In general, for little Camille, her grandmother was a role model. The girl absorbed her every word and believed in everything Wendy said. The girl felt the urgent need for her grandmother's involvement and dialed her number. Wendy answered at once, finally deigned to call. I already thought that you had completely forgotten about my existence. Grandma, I called you last night. Really? Then why didn't I remember it? The girl guessed the cause of Wendy's unconsciousness by her voice and manner of speaking. And it was not difficult to guess that the woman had already had time to take a revelatory drink, as she herself called strengthening wine. It was a bad habit she picked up after the tragic death of her daughter. Camille many times tried to instruct her grandmother on the path of truth, but she was annoyed and advised to take care of themselves. Therefore, the granddaughter decided not to focus on this fact. Grandma, we all tend to forget little things, and sometimes even important events. You know, today I was thinking of Aunt Vanessa Camille. Please don't even mention that name to me. But why? What did that woman do that you don't want to talk about her? Well, she didn't do anything in particular, except for one mean thing. Maybe someday I'll tell you all about it. But not now. It's not time yet. Okay, but I still have some questions that only you can answer. I stopped by at the other end of the Shelkovo, and then I heard someone else's laughter. No, granddaughter, you can rest today, and they're in the mood for a serious conversation. And besides, I'm not alone. That's where we should have started. All right, then I'll come by tomorrow morning, Camille. But not too early. Don't bother me. I'm an old man, you know, and I need a good night's rest. The girl threw the telephone coffee table with annoyance. I know about the peculiarities of your vacation, and you don't need to cover yourself with age. She realized that she had no moral right to judge her grandmother, but at the insertion of the bottle, Wendy began to turn into a serious problem. The once trim, attractive woman, in just a year, turned into a perpetually disgruntled person with a permanently antique face. Many acquaintances were bluntly expressing ideas. They made unpleasant remarks. Why have you watched your grandmother? Can't you see that a person is drinking? In the salon, women also often discussed this topic behind their backs. But for some reason, all the well-wishers blamed Camille for Grandma's weakness. And that was what depressed the girl most of all. In the evening, she tried to dial her relative's number again, but in response, she only heard long beeps. As soon as there was light outside the windows, Camille was already on her feet. She decided to visit Wendy first and then stop by the salon. She pressed the bell button for a long time until she heard the familiar charkit and footsteps outside the door. I asked you to come later, but come, don't just stand in the doorway. Otherwise, curious faces will start sticking out. The girl carefully shut the door behind her. Grandma, what's the fashionable thing to say? Whose faces are you so angry about? Of course, whose? It's my neighbor's habit of peeping and eavesdropping. Yesterday, we were also sitting there, relaxing quietly and modestly. And here we are. What happened at your party last night? The downstairs neighbor showed up early to warn us. All that gentle singing got in their way. Camille's put the kettle on. It's better not to grumble. Now we'll have tea with you. You're scolding the neighbors for nothing. They also have the right to a quiet life, and I don't disturb them. If that were true, they wouldn't bother you with their evening visits. Camille, have you come to lecture me, or are you trying to be supportive? More of the latter. The kitchen was a mess, and the girl had a hard time finding a free chair, on which she sat Wendy, and herself sat down on a small upholstered path that did not match the interior of the room. The old woman sighed heavily and nervously fumbled with the hem of her robe. She tried not to look her granddaughter Camille in the eye. I'm sorry. For what? You're always a good thing to me. What do you see yourself in? Everything. That's why I drink, to forget myself. I can't forgive myself for what happened first to Sam, then to Wendy. Do those words nail a girl to the golden sweet floor? Grandma's got something on her mind. You can't do that. You're not responsible for their deaths. And the investigation confirmed it. What you're talking about, granddaughter, you're a tracker. Just to get the case out of your hands as soon as possible and report back. After all, no one was really investigating at that time, although I asked and even wrote to the highest authorities. Grandma, wait, I don't understand. What are you talking about? That your parents didn't die by accident. Do you have any facts to back that up? That's the thing, I don't. It's all conjecture. But I do know that Vanessa was threatened a few days before she died. Sam mentioned some phone calls too. Camille remembered the recent visit of an unfamiliar jock, and an unpleasant shiver ran through her body again. Surprisingly, I had a very unpleasant fellow come into my parlor the other day. Wendy stood up abruptly, and the table fell with a clatter. There was horror in her eyes. Camille, what did this man say to you? I didn't quite understand, but I think he threatened me too. Said my mom had an unpaid debt, and now I owed the landlord to make up for the loss. What was he spitting? I still don't fully understand. The older woman grabbed the girl's hands. My girl, you have no idea how serious this is. These scary people will do anything. You need to go to the police right away, or do you want me to go myself? Where are you going dressed like that? Look at yourself in the mirror and really look like a grandma. Let's get this over with. You've turned your house into a shelter for the abused and the poor. Remember, it wasn't that long ago that you were judging people who were addicted to booze, and now you're addicted. Wendy tucked into her granddaughter's shoulder and cried bitterly. If you knew, my girl, what a heavy weight on my heart. It tears me from the inside, and I don't know how to go on living. The girl stroked her grandmother's back like a little child. That's how Wendy used to comfort her. And now she's trying to restore her loved one's faith in herself. Grandma, don't beat yourself up for nothing and don't look for fault where there is none. And give it up. I'll try, I promise you. I'm disgusted with myself, but don't disregard my advice and go to the authorities. What am I going to tell them? That you've been threatened. Facts. There's no proof, and I don't know the guy who came to see me. He's definitely not from around here. Soon the morning conversation with her grandmother was forgotten because she had to deal with a conflict situation at the salon. One customer had written a complaint against Evelyn and even demanded financial compensation for the wrongly cut teacher's hair. Evelyn sobbed in the back room. Camille, that broad has 3 hairs on 2 appliances. I gave her a fancy haircut from what she had. Should I transplant my curls? Emily winked at the hostess too. Let me see if I can straighten this out. That lady loves to make a scene. She's never satisfied. Not 10 minutes later, the master would be back, sending her home. Evelyn came to life so quickly. And what did you do? Oh, nothing much. A little scissors around her ankles and then backcombed her hair. Now our client's gonna have a cool haircut for a week. In high spirits, Camille headed home after a day of work. She decided to stop for groceries on her way to the store. The streets were deserted, so she immediately noticed a car with tinted windows following her. An unpleasant feeling of shivering ran through her body again. The girl tried to calm herself. I had imagined it. Now I turned down a blind alley and the pursuit would stop. But the car also turned to the shameful street unexpectedly for itself. Camille ran across the street right in front of the car, and in a few minutes was already near the shopping center. She looked around and breathed a sigh of relief. The car that had followed her was gone. The deputy chief of the district police department looked at her with undisguised derision. He cast a careless glance at the sheet of paper on which her details were marked. Dear Camille, I understand your concern, but I want you to understand my concern as well. There are no facts that there is a real threat to your life. What you have told me here is based only on your hunches and suspicions. It's no basis for a case. Comrade Major, but I'm not LSU, and the salon staff can confirm it. They saw that man come in, but they can't say they heard him threaten you. Yeah, but can they? And I'll tell you again, your fears are nothing to worry about. Do I have to wait until I'm killed? I take it that's the only time you'll have an excuse. My dear girl, why go to extremes? I'm not a nice girl. All right, Camille, perhaps you're tired and you're imagining things. The girl could hardly hold back her tears. She wanted to tell this indifferent man in uniform everything she had to say. Comrade or Mr. Major, I've heard such words many times. You see, but it only shows your unwillingness to help. 4 years ago, my father died under very strange circumstances, and last year my mother was killed. They were also threatened, and my mother even appealed to the district police officer in the hope that she would be helped. But she was not heard, and she died. Wait. I remember that case, or rather, I was told about it. So you're the daughter of a smaller business that crashed, and you claim that your mother was threatened too. Did you see or hear them? No, but my mom told me. You see, there you go again, all that uncertainty. The major suddenly smiled as big as if he just won a big Camille prize. It happens. You've been through so much. Shocks are very hard on the nervous system. Have you seen a specialist? What kind of specialist? The major waved one hand uncertainly, but kept smiling. I'm not good at medicine, but I've heard that there is one. Camille jumped up as if she had been doused with boiling water. You think I'm crazy? I came to you for help. Did you? The girl ran out of the chief's office and in the doorway ran into an employee who was in a hurry to get to the major's office. It is given by Comrade Major. Why are you hurting girls? If I'm not mistaken, this new owner of the Salon Paris. Do you know her? How can I put it? A little. Last year I was a district officer and the girl came to me after the death of her mother. The major shook his head understandingly. Talked about harassment, threats, and suspicion. Something like that, but no specifics. And she has a grandmother you should know. Smith's crazy too. She used to work in the mayor's front office. After her daughter died, she started using. The cop gestured to the meaning of the expression. Oh yeah, it's like a Mexican soap opera. My grandmother also complained to me about threats and harassment. But you can't trust a witness like that, you know. Just out of respect for her age, I'm not putting a record on this woman. But neighbors often complain about her, and we must respond to such signals. And there should be no discounting of age and status. We have tools to influence antisocial elements, but they have taken the fashion of going door to door, begging with their grievances. The major was not on a joke, and the former district officer already regretted that he had reminded him of last year's story. So the captain decided not to go into the details of that tragedy. although he also had suspicions that the successful businesswoman had not died accidentally. The policeman then tried to prove this fact to continue the investigation, but he was called to the carpet and told off. And then he was transferred to the police department. He saw it as punishment for taking unnecessary initiative. Camille walked slowly down the street, not noticing the hurrying passers-by. She was at a complete loss and did not know what to do. Her grandmother did not answer the phone again, and the girl decided to go to the cemetery. In difficult moments, she always visited her mother's grave. Father was buried in his small homeland. So decided his relatives. Grandma scolded them at the time. "What are you doing? Camille, Sam's only daughter, and you're denying her the opportunity to visit her father's grave." But the aunt, the dead man's own sister, said firmly that if her daughter wanted to, she could come and do her duty any minute. "But I won't bury my brother here. It's not a good place." I didn't like Sam's idea of settling here. But he persisted. And here's the result. My father burned to death in the bathhouse. He and the men first went fishing, had a few drinks, then decided to have a steam bath. They noticed the father's absence at dinner. They rushed to the bathhouse, and he was there without signs of life. Everyone decided that the man was poisoned by carbon monoxide because there was a specific odor in the room. But the company members were surprised by this circumstance. So someone closed his skirt early on purpose. But none of us could have done that. We're not amateurs. No one believed that the deceased had created the dangerous situation. Camille's mother was shocked, and the relatives who came from far away did not authorize an autopsy. Therefore, the death of a very young and healthy man remained unsolved, still a mystery. Spring only warmed the earth a little, timidly, so there were puddles and mud everywhere. Camille struggled to get to a bed behind which stood a large wooden cross, a memorial she and her grandmother planned to erect closer to summer. Camille stroked the picture from which her smiling mother looked at her and wept bitterly. "Mommy, my darling, how much do I miss you? I feel like I'm living behind a transparent wall. I see people, I try to talk to them, but they can't hear me. Mommy, can you tell me what to do?" This plea went on and on in the girl's heart. At this moment, she felt lonely and not needed by anyone. But suddenly, a woman's voice sounded very close behind her back. "Humility alone will soothe the soul." Camille shuddered. She turned around sharply and saw in front of her a woman wearing a black shawl covering most of her face. She wanted to ask the stranger what her strange words meant, but the woman slipped past her and seemed to melt into thin air. The girl became frightened and hurried to leave the cemetery. In the evening, she told her grandmother about the mysterious stranger, but Wendy was not surprised. She must have bumped into her. She went to the cemetery every day. Her son had died. It's been a while. It's been over 10 years. The poor mother comes to talk to him. "Grandma, I talked to my mom too. That's not normal." The old woman looked at her granddaughter with surprise. "Why do you think so?" "I now doubt my sanity at all. I went to the police today. The other day I thought I was being followed." "No, that's for sure, because a car was following me and then turned the same way I turned to check out this obscure surveillance. Then that guy who came by in the winter. I don't like all this. It can't be an accident." Grandma was washing dishes and froze with a plate in her hand. "And what did the police tell you?" The girl laughed nervously. "You won't believe it. The major advised me to see a doctor. That's to be expected. I, too, went to our police officer after Vanessa's death. He seemed to listen to me at first. He even promised to reopen the investigation. But then everything went quiet. And when I asked again, they just politely kicked me out the door. And you started drinking after that." Wendy burst into tears. "It's 1-to-1. I'm not made of metal. I don't have a heart of stone. I lost my only daughter. They look at me like I'm crazy. Where do I look for justice? Yeah, grandmothers. I, too, had the feeling today that the world was divided by an impenetrable wall of indifference." The last thing Camille expected was a call from Vanessa. An old friend of her late parents called before the weekend and asked her to come over urgently. "Camille, honey, it's very urgent, okay. Aunt Vanessa, I'll be there as soon as I have a minute." "No, my girl. Time is of the essence. Come over tomorrow. Do you remember my address? I haven't forgotten. Camille was puzzled by this call because Vanessa wasn't even at her mother's funeral. She didn't call to explain her absence. She didn't come afterwards to visit the grave. The girl cared the least about the fate of this unpleasant woman. That's why she didn't make inquiries. And then suddenly Aunt Vanessa found her on her own. I wonder why she needed it so urgently? But Camille did not absorb this call into the chain of strange events. After all, Vanessa was already at the age when people often do unexpected things. The girl first planned to go to the regional center on her father's car, which had been bored in the garage for many years. But the memory of the tragedy that happened to her mother stopped her. I'll go. I'd rather take the bus, it's more reliable. But the traveler did not know that the vehicle of local destination will stop at each village on the way. As a result of this unusual route, it took her more than 4 o'clock to reach the city, all exhausted and hungry. She rang the doorbell of the apartment she had visited once before with her mother. Vanessa must have been waiting for her in the hallway because the door opened immediately. Camille, what took you so long? I took the bus. Our public transportation is a disaster. I only use it on rare occasions. Otherwise, I take my car or a cab. I didn't know you were an experienced driver. Oh no, I'm not much of a driver, but I have my own chauffeur when I need him. He's always at the ready. He's a good, kind guy. He does all my errands. What kind of errands can an old woman run? The woman used this popular maneuver to get a compliment, and she got it. Vanessa, you underestimate yourself. You look beautiful, and you're sure men are looking at you. Mistress Nancy drowned Camille's gaze. You make me blush. At my age, it's time to think about mortality, not men. And I've had no luck with them all my life. And now I often wonder if they're all like that, or if I'm the only one who's ever been a jerk. In the mouth of an old lady dressed in a luxurious robe, the coarse language sounded kind of sweet. The spacious apartment was tastefully furnished too. It was expensive, you could feel it in everything. It's cozy here. The woman had realized. Why am I keeping you at my doorstep? Let's go and have a cup of tea and have a heart-to-heart talk. The suggestion of a heart-to-heart was immediately alarming. But intuition told her to be on her guard. Vanessa led her guest into the spacious living room, where tea dishes were left on the coffee table. She didn't stop talking for a moment. Camille thought that this was the behavior of people who were either badly confused or trying to put the interlocutor's vigilance to sleep. At first, she was more inclined to the first option. But after the first words of the hostess, she realized that Vanessa had not good intentions towards her. Make yourself comfortable, and I'll bring tea. The woman slowly went to the kitchen, and the guest went to the oak wall. Behind the glass, a Chinese set shone with luxury. But it was several photographs that caught her attention. In one picture, Camille saw a familiar face, but she could not immediately remember where she had seen it. A voice came from behind her. This is my daughter Nancy. She lives in the States now. I was terribly worried when she decided to go to a foreign country. But my girl made the right choice. At least I'm lucky for that. The hostess poured Ella tea in a miniature cup, and she herself kept looking at the guest. It was a piercing stare. Camille felt uncomfortable. Vanessa, you said you had something very urgent to do with me, didn't you? Forgive my slowness. You must be in a hurry. If I miss the last bus, I'll have to walk. You stay here. I've got plenty of room. Thanks for the invitation, but I have to be at work tomorrow morning. We're having a small event, and my presence is essential. Camille's attentive gaze did not escape her. Vanessa tensed at those words. In her voice, there appeared a faint surprise. You are telling what kind of events can be in a rural beauty parlor. Gosti carefully placed her cup on the napkin. You know, the most beautiful girls and women live in the countryside. It's just a different kind of real beauty. And our institution decided to join the action. Beauty will conquer the world. By the way, this cause originates here in the regional center. How interesting. And what's the point? Nothing special. A certain day is chosen. And to all women who have a birthday on this date, our masters serve absolutely free. Brides are on a first-come, first-served basis. Vanessa was clearly surprised. I think it's unjustified generosity. You could go down the drain. No, it's not. As a rule, there's not a lot of applicants. The promotion only lasts a few hours. But the owners get some perks too. No, it's still very dangerous. Personally, I am very responsible to the financial issue and never throw money into the wind. In principle, that's why I invited you. The woman was silent, choosing words. Do you understand? Camille Klochko, I'm not comfortable talking about it, but I have to do it. Your late mother. We were friends with your parents for so long. It's a shame they passed away prematurely. Vanessa gestured beautifully at the nearest tear. But Camille didn't buy the gesture. She remained silent and looked directly into the eyes of her interlocutor. After a short pause, she continued. But her voice was firm and confident. I must inform you that Vanessa borrowed a small sum from me shortly before her death. I know nothing about it. Do you have a receipt? How could I? Vanessa and I were on trust. Sometimes I borrowed from her. And on occasion, she got weird. According to the financials, Mom was doing well. I don't know why she needed to borrow money. And she didn't like credit. She always tried to make do with what she had. The landlady became very agitated, as evidenced by the vapors on her forehead. It was an unusual situation. So, Vanessa, let's make a deal like this. I'll check with my lawyer, and then I'll call you back. He should be up to date on everything. And if everything you've told me here checks out, I'll pay you back every penny. Vanessa was desperate. Camille, you don't believe me. Let's just say I doubt it. And let me ask you how much we're talking about. Stammering. The hostess gave a figure and Camille laughed. But that's absurd. Vanessa, you're not mistaken. The hostess managed to pull herself together and said defiantly, I don't have any abnormalities like your grandmother. What does my grandmother have to do with this sudden transition? Wendy ruined my life once, and the trail of her malice runs to this day. And we were practically cousins. There were no more tears in the landlady's voice. And at first I hated it. Camille wanted to leave the house. But Vanessa stopped her. Don't hurry, my dear. I haven't said everything yet. I thought we'd settle this thing amicably, and you'd sign a commitment, and I wouldn't sign anything without a lawyer. All the more reason I don't understand what you're claiming. I'm sorry, but I get the impression you're just trying to take some money from me, although the amount of money you're claiming isn't exactly modest. Why on earth should I pay you? Your family owes me and my daughter an eternal debt. It's thanks to Wendy that my little girl was raised by her stepfather without a father. She's the one who must have ruined my happiness. And these poor little crumbs are just a fraction of that. Are you serious? It's a penny to you. Don't you think you're trying to cheat me right now? And I might as well report you. Let me through. Vanessa stood in the doorway like an indestructible rock, but there was a small space through which Camille slipped into the antechamber, skirting the sad figure of the landlady. The girl glanced again at the picture under the glass in the wall. And at this critical moment, she recognized the smiling Vike, who was embracing the brightly painted maiden. The jock who had appeared at her salon in winter. With one jerk, she swung open the apartment door and started running down the stairs. Only when she was on the first floor did she realize that the apartment building had an elevator. A pretty old lady, introduced as a janitor or concierge, shouted little, "Why are you walking?" "We have serviceable elevators. It's okay. It's good for your health." Once outside, Camille couldn't breathe in the fresh air. She felt like she'd been in a cramped cave for over an hour. Involuntarily, she looked up and noticed a familiar silhouette in the window of the 6th floor, flying off apparently the old one. This involuntarily expressed in an exclamation made her turn around, walking with a baby stroller couple. All the way back, Camille thought about what she had heard and seen. The mosaic of strange facts was beginning to form into a unified picture, but there were still many fragments missing. So she decided to go straight to Wendy's. She needed to get answers to this cascade of questions. Oh, what an unexpected encounter. Wendy, it all came out of joy. She herself emanated a bright wine ambergray. Camille couldn't help herself. "Grandma, you promised me." The woman made some absurd movement with her legs, but she didn't realize it and almost fell. Her granddaughter was there in time to pick her up. "Oh my God, you're so drunk." "No, I'm not. I killed just a little bit. Jack, A neighbor bought me a drink. You can't say no when a nice man gives you a drink. Come on, I'll show you to your bedroom. The best thing for you right now is to get a good night's sleep. You're right, as always. My darling girl. The woman staggered toward the bedroom. Camille, I didn't just have a drink tonight. I had a good reason. I wonder what I went to Klaraveka's grave today. It's such a beautiful monument. You're smart. Mom deserved such a memorial. In the hustle and bustle, Camille forgot to tell her grandmother that 2 days ago the workers of the ritual company installed the monument, so the recognition of a relative surprised her. But how did you know? Kind people told me. You're always busy. Jack was at his mom's grave. She saw him not far from ours. And then he drove me in his car. And then he bought me a drink. Really, the ubiquitous kindness left only to hand out balloons to all the passersby on the street. Wendy didn't answer anything because she was already having pleasant dreams. Dusk began to fade outside the window, and Camille wanted to go home, but someone rang the doorbell. The girl struggled with the lock for a long time, and when she opened the door, she saw a man with a huge bag. Although the guest was quite drunk, his appearance and good suit testified to his normal social status. He put the package in front of him and solemnly said, "And here's a present for you, Santa Claus. Where is my kind Wendy?" The guests took a step forward, trying to get into the apartment. But Camille firmly pushed him back to the landing. "Grandmother is resting, and I suggest you go home too. And New Year's Eve was 6 months ago, more than that. So you're a little late with your presents." The man was confused. How could he be? We agreed that we'd sit down tonight and relax. The members of our cell should still come. The man laughed out loud, thinking his joke was a good one. But Camille didn't even smile. "Good citizen, please go to your home. How are you? You have a drink with your cell." Camille slammed the door in front of the guest's nose. He yelled, "Tell Wendy Jack came by." Jesus, seemed like a decent man. Why do people drink? And then they turn into animals. I'll have to keep watch tonight. Grandmother's peace of mind, or someone else will come along. Camille walked carefully through the apartment and noticed with bitterness that there was dust everywhere. Trying not to make any noise, she cleaned the living room. Then she washed all the dishes in the kitchen. In the refrigerator, lonely bored native carcass with varuher, at least soup. Empty pots. It wasn't hard to guess that Wendy hadn't cooked a full meal in a long time. In the evenings, she sometimes dined with her granddaughter, and during the day it was seen, interrupted, and with what she had to. Camille was overwhelmed with emotion. Something must be done about it urgently, otherwise she would endanger herself. When the apartment was cleaned up, the clock read almost 11 o'clock. But the day's events kept her awake. Camille turned on the floor lamp and went to the bookshelf. Reading had always been an effective sleeping aid. She had already reached out to pick up a detective book by a famous writer, but she noticed an old scrapbook. The tradition of keeping family pictures and albums was a thing of the past. Now everyone has their own folder in the computer, and if you want, you can remember pleasant moments from life. Rarities interested the girl, and she began to carefully flip through the pages of the album. A long time ago, back in her childhood, her grandmother showed her pictures of relatives and even told her about them. But Camille had not been interested in family history then. Now she looked with surprise at the unfamiliar faces of people with whom she was connected by an unbreakable thread of kinship. Many of the pictures were very old. The women in them wore old-fashioned floor-length dresses, and the men wore surtouts and vests. In other pictures, she could hardly recognize her grandmother. How beautiful and young she was. In many of the pictures, there was a pleasant-looking young man next to Wendy, very much like her. The girl couldn't help but say out loud, could that really be a brother? She never told me she had a brother. And I cut him out of my life once and for all. Camille didn't notice her grandmother leave her bedroom, though her appearance suggested she wasn't feeling well. She tried not to show it. The woman took the seat next to her granddaughter. You know the proverb about the child without an eye that spoils the life of 7 nannies? Who doesn't know it? But what does folklore have to do with it? Wendy sighed heavily. It has everything to do with the fact that we had such an ugly child in our family. That's my brother, Michael. I've been hiding this album. Did you find it? I guess I forgot to put it away the last time. Sometimes, especially lately, I look at these old pictures, flip through this album, and it's like a memory revisited. Camille, if you wouldn't mind fetching some water. Wendy made a full glass. Vanessa never learned the whole story. The girl was burning with impatience. That's how children wait for their secrets to be revealed in front of them. The magic box. Grandma, I'm going to faint from curiosity. Don't drown me. Tell me what you've been hiding so carefully all these years. Vanessa also spoke in riddles yesterday. The woman even jumped on the spot. You went to Vanessa's? Yeah, what's the big deal? She called me and asked me to come over right away. Wendy collapsed on the couch again. What a bastard. She got to you. What kind of songs did she sing to you? She knows how to talk dirty. She's second to none. She demanded money, said my mom owed her money, but I didn't believe her. It's all lies. Sam borrowed a small amount of money from her at first, but they paid it off right away. I found out too late, or I wouldn't have let them get involved with that person. I mean, she's a real bitch. She's a real bitch. She's invaded their trust, and I have my suspicions about her. Breathless, the girl looked at her grandmother and the latter at her. Grandma, that's what I'm thinking. Or something else. Perhaps we are troubled by the same thought. I've been thinking about it for over a year now. It's already become an obsession. I've only been thinking about it for a few hours, but I'm already sleep deprived. Why don't you tell me all the family secrets? Wendy started her narrative with apparent difficulty, but quickly became engrossed and even forgot about her poor health. Camille listened to her grandmother with her mouth open. She had never thought that such stories happened in real life. Wendy's great-grandfather was a family of famous Smith industrialists. The ancestors were famous not only for their fabulous wealth, but also for their generosity. Several generations were engaged in patronage of the arts and still preserved buildings built on their money, which found shelter for orphans and disadvantaged people. But when hard times came, most of the wealthy citizens hurried to hide with their goods abroad. The family was large, and not everyone agreed to live in a foreign land. The most enterprising of them secretly absconded with the family capital, leaving their relatives with nothing. My father told me that then, in a fit of anger, the eldest of the Smiths cursed the absent-minded grandson. This Alex was a banker, and it went straight to his head overseas. It was like a smudge, but we found out later, because at that time there could be no connection with foreign countries. For relatives, you could even pay for your freedom. But God had mercy on us. And what became of this Alex? He came to his homeland, he did. But it was later, during the thaw. I was very young then, and Michael was 6 years older than me. Alex was already old, barely on his feet, but proud. He kept inviting our father to visit him in America. But my father immediately sent my uncle to a known address. He, of course, took offense. But Michael was shocked by the American story. The guy just raved about America. True, only I knew about it, because he trusted me. A grandmother, but no pull. What happened next is what happened next. Secretly, Ethan corresponded first with LX. And when he died, he started corresponding with someone named Thomas. He was sort of his confidant. Twice this Thomas came to the country and Michael traveled with him. By that time, my brother was married and had a little daughter. Fecko knew several languages and worked as a translator. And then he was sent on a business trip abroad. Wendy sobbed. I still remember that day as if it happened yesterday. We had never suffered such shame in our lives. In the middle of the night, people in all black came to us and started asking us about Mitchell. I won't tell you all the details, but you don't need to. Anyway, that's what our freethinker always called him. Father sought asylum in the States. Father's heart couldn't bear the shame. A defector's son is a stigma on the reputation of a party worker. It's a good thing Mom wasn't there to witness it. She died early. That's the story. Grandma, wait. What happened to Michael's wife and daughter? Didn't you figure it out? No. Camille was staring wide-eyed at Grandma. Do you mean to say that Mom, yes, Vanessa, Michael's daughter, and his unhappy wife, couldn't bear the shame? Benjamin was dragged round and round to investigators' offices, interrogated, believed to be in league with her husband. The poor woman couldn't take it and went insane. I took Vanessa in. I gave her a different patronymic so that there would be no memory of the affair. Yeah, it's a heavy story, like a movie. Except it's a very violent movie. But I want to believe it has a happy ending. Grandma, wait, you didn't tell me about Vanessa. Vanessa. Vanessa is the upstart who's been grooming Michael for a long time. She wasn't shy around anyone, not even her brother's legal wife. Benjamin even caught her with her husband once. She wanted a divorce, but she forgave him. Feka went quiet for a while, but then he went on again. I do not exclude even that the brother wanted to run abroad with his mistress. But it didn't work out, apparently, because of the documents. So Vanessa was left with nothing. Why does she hate you? Because I've broken them up on more than one occasion when they've had their meetings in a rented apartment. And when Michael disappeared, she came to me and claimed she had her brother's daughter. But I don't believe it, because Vanessa is the worst bitch I've ever seen. She got married 5 times after that, but all of them failed. Well, that depends on what you call luck. She's got an apartment full of expensive furniture. You can tell she's not in need. Yeah, she also said her daughter lives in America. It was Wendy's turn to be surprised. That's an interesting fact. I didn't know that. Yeah, well, I guess we have a lot to learn. My grandmother keeps me wondering what our relatives are up to. And why do they need us? The woman was indignant. They are not relatives, and don't even think about it. And don't go to Vanessa anymore. I have a bad feeling about this. Camille felt uneasy in her heart, but she did not tell her grandmother. The next day, she remembered her visit to Vanessa and the young man in the photograph. She recognized him as the unshaven jock who had come to the salon. Another puzzle of the mosaic matched, and it was scaring the girl. Wendy gave in to her granddaughter's entreaties and decided to stay with her temporarily. Camille believed that the move would relieve her grandmother of the desire to gather company again. The old woman even looked better. She had a desire to do something useful. She spent her indomitable energy in the kitchen, trying to please her granddaughter with delicious dishes. When she noticed that Camille was going somewhere, she called her loudly. You should eat first, and then you can go to all 4 corners of the world. Grandma, I'd rather go to the cemetery later. Fresh flowers to put on Mom's grave. Wendy was surprised. Did you decide to drive after all? The girl winked cheerfully. Yeah, only I have 2 wheels. It's good for your health to drive with a full stomach. I'll make a quick trip there and back. It was about 5 kilometers to the cemetery. In a straight line, the path was almost halved. The girl had long ago mastered this route, and in a quarter of an hour she was there. Even from afar, she noticed a woman's figure, which seemed familiar to her. Camille beautifully arranged the flowers and sat down on a bench. She looked at the portrait of her mother frozen in marble and half whispered about her difficult life. Having been carried away by the communication with her visible interlocutor, the girl did not notice that the old acquaintance was next to her. The woman looked her directly in the eyes and remained silent. Camille felt a familiar sense of discomfort. You wanted to ask me something. Why aren't you saying anything? Beware of Vanessa. She's the trouble. Camille didn't notice the strange woman disappear again. She went down to the road and looked into the distance. But the woman was nowhere to be seen. The bus stop was deserted too. Some kind of obsession, as if the stupid woman had fallen through the ground. From the saddle of her new horse, Camille set off on the return journey, but all the way back she was haunted. The feeling that someone was watching her. She stopped several times, but did not notice anything suspicious. Cars whizzed by, but no one paid attention to the lone cyclist. To reassure herself, she said in a low voice, "Perhaps the major was right, and I have a persecution mania. I feel like someone's eyes are burning into my back. I can feel it physically." Looking around once more and making sure she was in no danger, Camille walked slowly down the familiar road. The excitement had receded a little, and she admired the beauty of the blooming summer. The girl was driving on such a bridge when suddenly a body jammed and lit up nearby. But she had no time to turn her head at this strange sound, because an unknown force lifted her above the ground and threw her down. She woke up to a terrible pain in her leg. It really hurt. A guy in shorts and a stylish baseball cap looked at her carefully. "How are you feeling?" "I'm not dizzy. I haven't quite figured out yet. Who are you?" The guy was still watching her. "I'm William, but that's it." "My name is William. Let me help you up. My car's up here." Camille tried to stand up, but immediately cried out in sharp pain. "My leg must be broken, but you got it, and I saw the whole thing. That asshole pushed you off the bridge on purpose. I was driving about 50 feet behind you. I'm sure there are other witnesses to the accident. We should definitely go to the police station and file a report." In front of the girl's eyes immediately surfaced the displeased face of the major, and she lived her life. The young man asked if you were cold. "It happens from shock. I, too, would probably go crazy if I was thrown from a height so abruptly. But we've got to get up there somehow. Grab my neck and hop on one leg. There's no other way in this situation. The path went up steeply, so it took about 10 minutes." Camille was completely exhausted. The swollen ankle and foot added to the discomfort. "I'll take you to the hospital first, so the medics can see what's wrong with your leg." The girl glanced in the driver's mirror and shrieked her whole face was covered in abrasions and scratches. William smiled encouragingly. "These wounds will quickly pass and there will be no marks left, but the leg is serious." "What do you think about the accident?" "Nothing yet. I'm sure he was trying to get you killed. I could see the cyclist pick you up and drop you like a feather." That remark interested Camille. "Tell me, William, was he this man?" The girl tried to mimic the dimensions of the man she knew with her hands. "I can't be sure of my measurements, but it was something like this. I couldn't see his face because he never turned around. He knocked you over and drove off like nothing happened. You landed lucky. You saw the old concrete beams at the bottom of the ravine." "I'm sinning again. I think you forgot your bike." "Not at all. Your two-wheeled steed is safe and sound. I threw it in the trunk." The guy turned onto a road leading to the center of the township. "You know I've seen you before. You work at the Paris Salon. It's a funny name for the province, but it's positive." Camille felt bad about her town. "By the way, I'm the owner of the salon. It's not by chance that the name of the salon was given to this place. It's a kind of tribute to history. It is. I didn't know that. A long time ago, a German industrialist did business in our town. They call them businessmen nowadays. And this man decided to decorate the main street with 3 bricks and named them in honor of 3 European capitals, London, Paris, and Berlin. Now I'll tell everyone interesting stories. After all, I am omnivorous. I am fond of everything little by little, traveling, collecting stories, writing articles. The only thing I haven't encountered are incidents like today." Camille laughed, but there was despair in her laughter, not joy. "I said the wrong thing about you. It seems to me that you are in a new and unfamiliar bind today. That changes the whole matter. After all, I'm here to visit and relax. My grandmother lives here. I try to visit her whenever I can. But I'm willing to sacrifice a few days to devote myself to an exciting endeavor. You know, I feel like Sherlock Holmes." Camille grinned. "William, you've taken it too high. But I don't rule out the possibility that you might actually be able to help make sense of this obscure case. It's just that my grandmother and I have nowhere to turn for help. The police. They don't want to listen to me. They think I'm not at home." The car pulled up in front of the hospital and William helped Camille out. "Can't you do it yourself? Let me help you. It's a strange day. We've been together for almost half an hour. I don't know your name. I'm sorry, William, but flying off a bridge with your head down doesn't make you think of introductions." "That's a ridiculous remark indeed." "No offense." The girl extended the hand she'd earned in the fall. "Camille, it's a pleasure to bring a real princess to the trauma center." When Camille came home that evening on crutches and accompanied by a strange young man, Wendy nearly fainted. "Granddaughter, what's wrong?" "My heart sensed trouble. I told you to be careful." William tried to briefly summarize the matter to the elderly woman, but after his story, Wendy had to be tempered with valerian. When the women recovered a little, she said thoughtfully, "And I don't understand. Why? What do they want from us? Or do they hate us so much that they don't really need a reason?" He looked thoughtfully at Wendy. "You'll excuse me, please, but this is the kind of thing people would only do for very big money. So big that the mind refuses to produce adequate thoughts." Camille looked at him and smiled sadly. But we don't have that kind of money, even though we have our own small business. It seems to me that we are very short of oligarchs. So this version is canceled. William put his finger up. Very wrong. Maybe there's something you don't know. But there could be a secret in your family or maybe in your parents. I'm not insisting. But let's think about it logically. Let's say your parents had a secret. But that's only theoretical. In reality, there's no such thing. My parents are good people. I'm not arguing or saying that a secret could be bad. But it could have been about money. If I got it right, it's all tied up in the family. No one on the outside has shown up yet. Wendy looked at William with interest. You're a young man, quite bright. But I think it's just plain hatred. William shifted his gaze from Camille to Wendy. Are you saying that you're, as you called her, Vanessa is so hated that she's willing to let you go to waste if anything goes wrong? And other people? Oh, you just don't know her. I'd love to talk to her. Wendy and Camille stared at William in surprise, and he was embarrassed. Pardon me for intruding. I came to visit my grandmother to unwind a little. The thing is, I'm going to open a detective agency. That's my dream, and everything seems to be in place. But I guess I'm not quite ready. I've helped people to the best of my ability before, and more often successfully than not. But such an interesting and complicated case, which I'm sure is directly connected with your roots, I've never seen, so I wanted to take the plunge. I'm sorry, I'll go again. Camille tried to stand up. But why are you sitting? You can't move around too much. Camille, if you don't mind, I've been visiting you, but I'll bring tangerines, as I should. He smiled. I'm very fond of Granny, but it's really boring here. Come, of course. And then Camille hesitated. Grandma, what about Paris? I can't go there all the time. William immediately said, well, I guess Wendy can take over. I'd love to be the driver. Wendy quirked her eyebrows. I certainly wouldn't believe you couldn't handle it. In fact, William and Camille had agreed to it on the way home from the hospital. Camille had to tell me that Grandma had taken to drinking, either out of fear or idleness, and get her to take care of business for a while. It'd be a nice little kick in the pants to help keep the old woman's mind off things. And as they talked, Camille almost forgot about it. She just didn't realize what William was all about, all the signs and doing all the time. Even thought he was having a tic. But as soon as he moved toward the door, she remembered. And she could hardly contain her laughter. Because William's gestures, the way he let down, the eyebrows were inimitable. Wendy looked at her granddaughter, who was about to cry. Grandma, it's all right there. But you have to be there at least a couple hours a day, don't you? Well, all right, just don't cry, and I'll try. If I can't make it, you and William, and I will carry you to the car. Okay, thanks, Grandma. In the morning, Grandma's at the wash with her hair nicely curled. Peeked in. Where are they? Are you awake? Yeah. Did something happen? Of course it is. Do you think I should go to the salon like this? Give me your makeup. I hope you have some. Grandma, you're insulting me. Don't forget we have a whole store full of makeup. Camille nodded at the large cosmetics. Wendy walked through. She took it and left the room. Camille didn't know what to think. Leaning back in her chair, moved to the kitchen. It was so nice having her grandmother at her breakfast was fabulous. Camille heard William come in, and Grandma sent him into the kitchen to drink coffee. The young man entered a little dazed. In his hand, he carried comfortable modern crutches. He had never given a girl such practical gifts. Good morning, Camille. Oh, thank you, William. What happened to your face? Nothing. William leaned over to her. Your grandmother I hardly recognized. Why? I don't know. She seemed different to me. They hadn't even had coffee yet. Wendy showed up in the kitchen. Camille gasped. Grandma, I don't recognize you. Dominating cream, skillfully applied makeup, changed her face. Completely Mom's coat. In front of them stood a typical businesswoman who didn't spare any money on herself at all. And I'm ready. Let's go. William got up, of course. Camille watched and did not understand how a man could lose a dozen years and all the traces of a big drink in the morning. An hour later, Emily called. Camille, how is your health? You're getting better, and your grandmother's been building us up. Camille, you asked what's wrong and hung up in surprise. Grandma had already ordered the gloves and the compound. She got a discount, reprimanded every hairdresser. But she didn't forget to praise them either. Anyway, she's been very active. Now she went to the store, so the girls decided to take a break and tell Camille everything. On the pretext of asking about her health. About an hour later, the doorbell rang. Camille got scared. Grandma is at work, and she has the keys. Who could it be? How could she? Cautiously approached the door and listened. I'm a mean and scary gray wolf. She smiled, opened the door. William stood on the threshold and held a cake. Here I didn't know if you liked cake or flowers better. Then I thought flowers were kind of early. So cake it is, especially since I like sweets too. The girl laughed, and I'm slowly getting used to your logical thinking. They settled down in the kitchen. They talked about nothing for a while, about the weather, about nature. Then Camille said, You know, William, I'd love to dig into our family. I can't understand why my parents suffered for what they did. So you're 100% sure they died for a reason? Of course not, and I'll never believe that. They sat for a while longer. William listened carefully to everything Camille had told him yesterday. She had told him in just 2 sentences, and today she had recounted in detail everything her grandmother had told her. He wrote something down, then asked permission to take some pictures. I'm just taking them and returning them so Wendy doesn't notice. Yeah, okay. I think if LX didn't change his name when he ran away, I might be able to find out something. Anyway, wait for me tomorrow. He looked at Camille for a little longer than propriety allowed. He held his gaze, and Camille was suddenly embarrassed. I'm not saying goodbye. I'm bringing the most important figure yet. Camille laughed. I've already had a call from the hairdressers saying that Granny is making a mess of things there. Who knows, maybe you and I will be right, and Granny will have some other interest in life. He's staring at Camille again. I can't. It's Camille. Let's use the first name. The girl breathed a sigh of relief. Finally, they laughed. 2 weeks passed. William still drove Wendy to and from work. He hadn't told Camille anything new yet. The only thing he said was that he had friends in America, and he asked her to find out, so to speak, the inside secrets of their court. But Camille began to look for herself. She read on the internet that Alex left a huge fortune after himself, and his nephew Michael entered the rights of inheritance. This, of course, was already something, but that was the end of all the information on the internet. Apparently, the next one would be when Michael died. Or had he already died? Camille wondered. Strange indeed. In fact, if money was involved in all this, why did her father's relatives take him back to his homeland to bury him? It was now that she realized she should have resisted. But they were all in such a state. Why did they say this place was a dead place? Was it connected? Camille was so confused, she didn't realize she'd fallen asleep. She was awakened by her grandmother's voice. Camille. Camille, are you all right? Yes, Grandma, I'm here. What's wrong? Wendy burst into the room, followed by William. But thank God, Grandma. What happened? They tried to burn down your barbershop today. William turned to Wendy. Let's just say it like it is. The barbershop wasn't going to burn down. It was a warning. You realize nobody burns anything in broad daylight. This was planted. It was written on a piece of paper. Pay me back. That's something. Camille was angry. You can go to the police with that. And I agree. Attempted arson. A note. Camille got a more gentle welcome this time. Is this your relative, your husband? If not, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. The uniformed man looked at Camille with a frown. But it's obvious to a fool. It's going to be a cold case. No one's ever solved a case like this around here. And it doesn't look like they're their own. They are. They'll never do that. No, not the husband. Camille has a charming smile. It's a private detective from the capital. The policeman was a little confused. Okay, I'll refer you to an investigator. He'll be handling your case. Well, what was he supposed to do with a private detective? That's all he needed. On the other hand, if he gets something, that detective will have to share it with them. And if they don't, what do they care? If even the detective couldn't figure it out, the investigator was a young man who tried his best to seem important and serious. Camille was upset at first, but William whispered in her ear, You're a young man. A hot case won't be closed just like that. Camille was once again amazed at William's insight. The investigator's name was Liam. And he said, blushing, "Let's make a deal. When we're here, you call me by my first name and middle name. And when we're somewhere else, you just call me Liam." William and Camille nodded. Liam slid a blank sheet of paper over to him. "Now let's start from the beginning." Camille sighed. She had had to tell her family's story too many times in the last few days, especially since the story wasn't hers at all. It was more of an older generation. Liam asked interesting questions. Some Camille could not answer because she simply did not know. Grandmother, of course, would answer them. Liam looked at them. "I take it no case has ever been opened?" "No." "I see. Let's do it this way. I have to go to the barber shop now. Document everything. Interview witnesses to open a case. When it's open, you can't just close it. After that, I'll come to your place to talk to your grandmother. It seems to me the clue is too close. We can see it, but we don't understand it." Too close. Camille breathed indignantly. "I mean, if we'd solved the riddle sooner, maybe my parents would still be alive. Maybe. But maybe not. We'll see." William helped her up to Camille's apartment. They heard a loud voice still on the landing. Camille's grandmother looked fearfully at William. Who was she with? They walked in, and Camille realized everything at once. On the sofa sat the very same Ambo, and in the armchair was Vanessa. "Camille, hello. I'm here to see you. And you have strangers here." "Grandma's not a stranger." Wendy turned abruptly to her granddaughter. "Camille, calling the police. Don't you realize they came to see you, just didn't know I was here too?" William apologized. "Camille, I have to go to the bathroom for a minute." The girl looked at him in surprise. "You found the time. Maybe there would be such a scandal here that they'd all have to be rescued." As William closed the door behind him, Camille saw that he was dragging his cell phone out of his jacket. "That's it. Well, William, he's back in a couple minutes. So, Camille, you should probably ask the uninvited guests to leave your house, shouldn't you?" Ambal grinned, stood up, and loomed over William. But William, though much smaller, did not waver, did not look away. "Vanessa, why do you think so unflatteringly of us, young man, without knowing our affairs? Your Camille owes me a large sum of money. I realize she may not have that kind of money, but we've offered to give her the business. I'm even willing to pay a little extra. And that's just out of the kindness of my heart. It's not worth anything. As far as I know, Camille didn't borrow anything from you, but Camille or her parents. What difference does it make now? It's not fair that I should lose my money. I lent it to you. Wendy couldn't take it anymore. Aren't you ashamed of yourself? But I know that Vanessa and Sam had no debts. How would you know? You've long since lost your mind and forgotten everything. That's because you drink too much. I'm surprised you're in condition today, but it's not evening yet, isn't it?" William sat down on the chair next to Camille and turned to Vanessa. "Tell me, Vanessa, who is this young man? What difference does it make?" "He's my daughter Anechka's fiancé. She lives in America. He came to visit without a nanny." The woman looked at the Ambo, then at William. "Anechka has very important business there. She couldn't come. Can you tell me why your future son-in-law wanted to send Camille to the other world?" "What kind of nonsense are you talking about?" "Why are you talking nonsense? You see this? I was following him when he threw Camille off the bridge, and I have an excellent recorder in my car." Vanessa looked confusedly at the Ambo. He motioned to William. "Where's the tape?" "Well, you know the answer is in a safe place." The man turned to Vanessa. "No, that wasn't the deal." She looked at him angrily. "Oh my God. But God has given us assholes as relatives, so sit down and keep quiet." Amble sniffed resentfully and sat back in his seat. "Young man, and I'm sure you're wrong. Tell me, what is the reason for your visit today? If I understand correctly, the circumstances are not in your favor, because Michael, Wendy's brother, never acknowledged your daughter." Vanessa choked. "Ah, you've done some digging. But I hope you realize that there's so much money at stake, you've got nothing left to live for." Then Wendy asked, "So you're dead?" "Yes, Wendy. 3 months ago. The thing is, Vanessa was never able to prove that her daughter was Michael's daughter. They did some tests. Vanessa spent a lot of money trying to fake a positive test, but Michael had a lot more, so no one wanted to get involved. All the tests, of course, were negative. Vanessa jumped up. No, she didn't. It was all a setup. We can still prove it. And what can't you prove? And you've known for a long time. Michael inherited a huge fortune. Alex wasn't just rich. His business had been booming all along. When it became clear that he wouldn't admit it, Vanessa made the decision to eliminate possible heirs. Camille listened and didn't really understand what heirs were even being talked about. William, meanwhile, continued. He turned to Wendy. You were a bit of a liar when you said you'd never spoken to your brother at all. Wendy sighed. Once, just for a few hours, he brought money for Vanessa, but I kicked him out. Well, he also called us over there. Never saw him again. That's right. He didn't chase her away, but he didn't acknowledge her either. And when Vanessa found out he'd gone to Russia, she realized she had to act fast. The thing is, your brother came to say goodbye. He was diagnosed with cancer, but he still had a pretty decent amount of time to live. First time things didn't go according to plan. Yes, Noah, you honestly thought Sam went to the bathhouse with his wife. That shows your poor preparation because Vanessa hated bathhouses. Were you identified? You appeared on the shore as locals who were just coming from fishing. Belle smiled. Talk anyway, as you realize, nobody's getting out of here. And the man put the barrel down beside him. Wendy covered Camille, grabbed her tightly. The girl was crying. How could you? Why? Vanessa's in the cheese. For the money, sweetheart. It should belong to us. The second time, you decided to act for sure and damaged the brake hose on the car. That would have been it. But then Camille came of age. She was no less of a threat. Vanessa grinned. Wow, where did you come from? A young man too smart for this rotten land. She turned to Wendy and Camille. What are you looking at? I had a dream all my life, and I loved Michael, and he loved me too. And if that old crust hadn't interfered, I would have gone away with him. This is all your fault. Michael's money should belong to me and Anna. Well, you realize that's impossible. All of it. Why? Vanessa stared at him with sightless eyes. Because Camille is Michael's direct granddaughter, which he recognized before he died. There may well be a will. Yes, Vanessa. That's why your daughter now has to woo notary Michael, and he's 20 years older than her. Where did you come from? Vanessa grabbed the gun that was lying next to Noah and pointed it at Camille. If you die, we get everything. You don't need it anyway. We really do. Wendy stood up and covered her granddaughter with herself. And that old idea, when Vanessa tried to push Wendy away, but somehow turned uncomfortably, there was a deafening sound. William slowly sat down on the floor. At that moment, the door flew off its hinges and the police burst into the room. William. Camille fell to her knees beside him. William opened his eyes. I'm sorry. It was my first case. 2 months had passed. Wendy looked at his granddaughter. You thought well. Camille smacked her window slit. Grandma, of course. Think about it. Where are we going to put all this money? I only give half of it away. But for our orphanages, it's a great help. Wendy sighed. You're a good girl. You're going to her now. Yeah, Grandma, you know, it's been a long time coming. I'm going to pick her up. A woman is coming by tonight to look after her. She's not aggressive. And in fact, you'd think she's perfectly adequate, just stuck in the time Michael left her. Wendy sighed again, and Camille looked at her suspiciously. Granny, what aren't you jealous of? Well, it's your blood after all. Camille hugged her grandmother. That's what you think. I may be bad, but I feel nothing but pity for my grandmother. I just know it's wrong. She didn't do anything wrong, and she should spend the rest of her life with her family. I love you very, very much. Wendy waved her hand. Oh, suck it up. Grandma has court tomorrow. Yeah, I know. I hope they give them the full measure of punishment. The trial was delayed because everyone was waiting for Vanessa's daughter to arrive from America. The girl had gone on the run, and it took a while to apprehend her. But now the whole family is together. Tomorrow their fate will be decided. From the capital. Even the judge who was to hear the case had arrived. And Camille had only one thing on her mind. that the trial wouldn't take too long because William was being discharged this afternoon. For a week, Camille sat in the hospital corridor looking like a shadow. 4 ICU surgeries, deterioration, improvement, clinical death. After a week, a tired doctor sat down next to her. "Well, rejoice. Your fiancé's awake. I thought we'd never get him out." Camille cried and found nothing better to say than he is not my fiancé. The doctor grinned, "So he will be soon." "You're Camille. He was deliriously calling for you all the time." And a week later, she was invited to the notary's office to read Grandpa Michael's will. He left everything, absolutely everything, to his only blood granddaughter. They gave her probation with mandatory hours. Noah got 10, and Vanessa got 12 years. She was screaming, banging on the cage. "No, I don't want to go to prison. It's not right. Michael was my man. Should have left everything to me." Noah was dejectedly silent. "It's an easy mark now." It turned out to be not so happy. Did Camille run all the way to the hospital? No, but why didn't she drive like a fool, honestly? She flew into the hospital lobby. "Tell me, has William been discharged yet?" The nurse girl looked at her strangely and smiled silently, then nodded at the door. Camille slowly made her way towards the door. It was strange. She had been here as her own for a long time. All the nurse girls are on a first-name basis with her. What was going on today? She pushed the door open and backed away because a whole bunch of balloons flew at her. Oops. Camille looked at the balloons that filled the entire space under the ceiling and smiled. She had loved balloons going up in the air since she was a little girl. Loved it. She shuddered. William was standing next to her. "But you know that before, don't you?" And William suddenly got down on his knee, handed her a box with a ring in it. "I promise. Often release a whole bunch of marbles. Just marry me." Camille almost cried. I think she had been sobbing for several nights because she realized William would get out of the hospital and go to his home in the capital. Yes, yes, yes. She took his neck with her hands and saw that there were a lot of people around. Her grandmother, the girls from Curson, and William's parents, who came as soon as he was in the hospital. Standing next to her grandmother was Benjamin's second grandmother, who Camille had picked up from the hospital. Camille now felt that she was the luckiest person alive. She has so many people who came to be happy for her. It's a shame. Too bad Mom and Dad aren't around. But Camille was sure they could see everything. One thing made it a little darker. She would probably have to leave with her husband. It was unlikely that the Metropolitans would agree to live in this town, and Grandma certainly wouldn't. And it was just heartbreaking. "Do you think we should try to open a detective agency in this town?" Camille pulled away from him, looked into his eyes, smiled. "I told you how much I love you. Off the top of my head. I guess I haven't gotten around to it yet." Camille laughed, but then William said, "You're the best person in the world. And I love you very much." William held her close to him. "I only believe this one. Remember that I will always love you even more. Always."
Subscribe and click the bell. Miranda was agitated and excited. She had been busy in the kitchen since morning. In the middle of the day, her refrigerator was no longer able to hold the numerous appetizers and salads. On the stove, there was a huge pot of roast from the oven. Came intoxicating aromas of such a pie with berry filling. The woman was still circling between the table and the cupboard, figuring out what else she could create from the food at her disposal. Despite the abundance of dishes, Miranda felt that she had prepared too little food and the guests would go hungry. And the guests were expected to be important. A few days ago, Miranda and Sebastian Jenkins' daughter accepted a marriage proposal from her fiancé David for the city. And today, Jenkins was scheduled to meet David's out-of-town parents, and Miranda was terribly afraid of making a mess of things in front of her new in-laws. She looked thoughtfully into the refrigerator, wondering if she should add some raw slices to the existing slices. When Sebastian's husband entered the kitchen, assessing the situation, he walked over to his wife, put his arm around her, and gently pushed her away from the stock of provisions. "Miranda, calm down," he said affectionately. "You've already cooked enough to feed a company of soldiers. The guests won't eat it. They won't even be able to taste it. Do you think the woman was hesitant to go to the refrigerator? I keep thinking there's something missing. Everything is enough, and even with a surplus, reassured her husband. You'll see for yourself. Then we'll finish it for 2 more days, as if you're not happy about it. On the business of Miranda's husband, he laughed. Glad, of course. A kitchen full of goodies. Of course I'm glad. I see you're sweet and sour, and the meat's confused. Why are you trying so hard? Me and Kevin are nervous, my wife confessed frankly. What if we don't like each other? What if something goes wrong? The first impression is the strongest. David's parents won't like some little thing. That's it. And we have to communicate with them later about the wedding, and in general with relatives to be friends. And there's a big age difference between us. Maybe we won't hit it off. Sebastian and Miranda married late after 30, and their daughter was born even closer to 40 years old. Now the daughter was 22 years old, and the parents were approaching 60 years. In the family of the future son-in-law, everything was exactly the opposite. For city elders played a wedding almost immediately after school, and a year later gave birth to a son. They weren't even 40 yet, and their future daughter-in-law's parents could act as their parents at the same time. Miranda, it was very unsettling. Don't worry prematurely, Sebastian reassured his wife. Don't you think we don't have many young acquaintances? A lot, and we communicate with all of them somehow. At the very least, apply your professional skills to go for the city. We're fascinated by all native. Extinguishes the oven and let's go. We'll have a little rest. We'll have some tea. Worse? No. For the guests than a tired and withdrawn hostess. They'll be here in 300 hours. That'll give you time to catch your breath and take a shower. And I'll set the table while you're here. Yeah, Lisa will help. Don't worry, we'll make it perfect. Oh, my heart is racing. Miranda sighed. And if something goes wrong, Lisa will be upset too. Lisa was the name of the Jenkins daughter, the bride-to-be, which is what all the fuss was about. Actually, Miranda wanted to name her daughter Lisa, and Sebastian was fine with it. But as often happens, the young mother had no time to deal with the paperwork for the baby, and this duty was entrusted to the newly minted father. But here's the trouble. On the day when Sebastian was going to visit the registry office, he was attacked by some insidious virus. In the morning, the man felt only a slight malaise. But in the middle of the day, he had a fever, ran a very bad runny nose, covered his throat. Somehow Jenkins waited until work was over. He had asked his bosses to leave early so that he could get to the registry office before closing time. Overcoming weakness, he got to the office, but because of a runny nose, he pronounced his daughter's name inaudibly. At the end of the day, the woman who was working on the birth certificate did not ask him to repeat the name, but wrote it down as she heard it. Sebastian himself was in agony and fever. Neither did he reread the documents issued to him, just took the papers and went to his parents. He reasoned that it was not worth bringing a contagion into a house where a newborn child lived. He was given a week's sick leave. A few days later, when the weakness receded, and Sebastian, taking advantage of his free time, as a decent parent, took copies of the documents to the clinic, to the milk kitchen, to the accounting department of the institute where he and Miranda worked, and to some other organizations that had to be notified of the baby's arrival. This is how Miranda found out that her daughter's name was Robert and not Lisa, only 10 days after the birth certificate was issued. And that document had already been seen by so many organizations that it would have been too much of a hassle to redo it. The woman grumbled at Sebastian, of course, for a long time. But to the name of her daughter got used to unexpectedly, quickly. Especially her mother-in-law, having learned about the mishap, said with a laugh. And that she even suits this name. Look how thin and flexible she is. Lisa is Lisa. Jenkins was indeed born skinny and thin. No counter and no tugging. There was no infant resemblance at all, but the flexibility and firmness was there from birth. And that's what my mother-in-law accurately pointed out. Miranda had to put a lot of effort into swaddling the baby. Lisa turned from diapers, described from diapers, and even using the decay of legs, somehow expressed. This is how she grew up slender, thin, flexible, and willful. But despite the girl's unruly character, her mother loved her very much and worried about her daughter. Almost as much as in her childhood. That's why she was worried now before meeting her future relatives. She wanted everything to go off without a hitch. Good, at least with David, future son-in-law Jenkins, were familiar with a long time ago. We cannot worry unnecessarily. Who did the bloodline decide to marry? David was a positive guy in every sense, and Miranda and Sebastian liked him very much. Young people met right after graduation. David and his classmates celebrated the awarding of diplomas in the same restaurant as Robert fellow students. The girl studied at the PhilFac, and David in a technical university at the Faculty of Road Maintenance. Girls and men quickly took notice of each other. They got reacquainted and soon mingled. This evening formed several strong, stable couples, and Robert and David were among them. True, with the wedding they lasted longer than the rest of the fellow students. Robert wanted to find a good and steady job before the wedding. Since childhood, she dreamed of becoming a journalist. But in her time, she did not get enough points in the profile faculty, so she applied for the philological faculty. Starting from the second year, the girl tried herself as a freelance correspondent in different city and regional editions. But quite quickly, it became clear that the text was not cramped. She wanted to illustrate her words, at least with photos, or better, with video. That's the only way, the girl thought. It is possible to penetrate the modern news consumer, to convey to him what you really want to say. Therefore, having received a diploma, the girl began to storm television. It took her 6 months to get on a local TV channel, and another 6 months to get a foothold there and become in demand. Even a relatively popular correspondent, whose stories viewers waited for, watched with attention, and discussed later both in kitchens and on social networks. All the while, David, immediately after graduation, having got a job in one of the city's construction trusts, courted the rising star of the screen and waited for her consent to the wedding. And then he did. Lisa came running home an hour before the guests arrived. She brought the drinks, helped set the table, shared the abundance and variety of treats. The out-of-towners showed up on time. And half an hour after the start of the feast, Miranda realized that she was worried for nothing. Kelly and John, David's parents, turned out to be very nice people, calm, friendly, cheerful. Kelly was a housewife. She called it still herself. And in between, taking care of the house. John was engaged in entrepreneurship, kept a small manufacturing company, but did not want to talk in detail about his work. Give at least here to rest from business. The man joked back. Make friends with the parents of the future son-in-law managed to quickly enough, and the difference in age did not prevent rapprochement. So Zagorodny Sr. quickly agreed that they will not impose their wedding format on the children. Let the celebration will be held the way the young people want. I think it's the best option, Kelly said. I remember my own wedding with horror. Mom and Dad said, since we all pay for everything, we decide who to invite and where to party. And what did we get? A room full of some strange older relatives for the ransom. In the best rustic traditions, music old Toastmaster with silly contests. I wasn't even allowed to choose a dress like I wanted in the registry office. It was some kind of cake. In white rose-colored glasses, I still cannot look at the photos. Yeah, backed up John. It was a tiring event, but it's never too late to get it right. Miranda smiled softly. Now in the registry office, you can order a simple registration. Not real, but solemn and even away. At least in nature, at the beach, at home. And have a new wedding just the way you want it. Yes, Sebastian confirmed. We did that for our 25th wedding anniversary. The couple wanted to be romantic. So we did it again. We rented a Miranda dress. They organized a tuxedo for me. And we renewed our vows at the wedding palace. And you know, I was skeptical at first, but at the end of it, I got emotional. I think even more than I did at my real wedding," he laughed. John hummed skeptically, but Kelly was fascinated by the idea, and she began to ask with curiosity and interest how to organize everything, how much the ceremony cost, what are the requirements. Slightly frightened by his wife's enthusiasm, Zagorodny tried to restrain her. "Kelly, wait. While we now have a wedding of children is more important. How about we do both ceremonies on the same day?" Lisa immediately suggested it. That would be so great, so romantic. And again, the concept. Intergenerational. Continuity within the family. It's like nothing anyone's ever done before. The discussion went to a new level. The women loved the idea. David, as the groom, supported the thread in everything. But the older men quickly got tired of the enthusiastic plans of the group and retired to the balcony for a smoke. Having returned from a smoke break, they began to change plates on the table and finally brought hot food from the kitchen. Only with this they managed to interrupt the conversation and direct it in a new direction. "Everything is so delicious," John said delightedly. "I've never had a roast like this before. Miranda, are you a cook by any chance?" "No, are you?" laughed the venerable Miranda. "I'm an honored pensioner. Cooking is a hobby. I used to work in a completely different field. I'm a psychologist, and not just a psychologist, but a doctor of psychology," emphasized Sebastian. With a meaningful thumbs up. "I've never been able to reach such heights. Sebastian and I worked at the same institute," Miranda explained. "Only he stopped at the master's thesis and abandoned his doctoral thesis. But I had the patience." "Wait," John interrupted the woman. "What do you mean? Were there psychologists in the Soviet Union? It seemed to me that they only proliferated in the last 10 to 15 years. The Jenkins looked at each other and laughed. Even Lisa laughed heartily at her future father-in-law's delusions. "You're right about something, John. From the media," I said Miranda. "Active popularization of psychology in our country really started only in the early noughties. But this science itself is not the first 10 years or even 100 years old. And in the Soviet Union it certainly was. Only in those years there was more demand for social psychology. The course was to work with the team on the compatibility of its participants. There were psychologists at schools, of course, at factories, at large organizations, but their activities were aimed at strengthening the corporate spirit, as they would say nowadays. And for the most part, specialists working in psychoneurological dispensaries were engaged in solving personal problems and detecting diseases, and they were of little value. I'd worked there for a while too. I was interested in interaction with specific people. I went into this profession wanting to help people, but then I saw the attitude to such help and went into science. How did you find out about the profession in the first place if it wasn't on the radar?" Kelly asked. "Why did it suddenly occur to you to become a psychologist? After all, you can help people in many places." "Oh, that's a very interesting story," David suddenly cut in. "It's not even a story of career guidance, it's a family story." "Tell it, Miranda." Well, the short story was Jenkins, but her future son-in-law interrupted her. "No, don't. Just tell it short, like they told me. So you already know it all by heart." Sebastian mocked the young man. "So what?" David objected. "I like the way Miranda tells it. And the story is interesting. And Mom and Dad will understand everything about you. But now we're intrigued." John said insistently, "Miranda, after such publicity you can't help telling." In fact, John did not want the conversation to return to the discussion of the wedding and the decorative registration of his wife. For the sake of it, he was willing to listen even to a family tale, though he didn't really like such stories. But he liked the wedding ceremony even less, and he didn't want to participate in such a reenactment. John expected that the story would distract his wife from the idea given at the beginning of the evening, and then she would forget about it. So he enthusiastically began to persuade his future relative to tell the story. However, Miranda especially did not resist. After a roast with tea and cake, she began her story. Miranda Kendall. In the future, Jenkins was born in a small village Putilova 200 kilometers from the regional center. She was the youngest child in the family. Her parents had 2 older sons and a daughter. And like all younger children, Miranda grew up spoiled and loved. Although there was nothing to spoil the girl, they lived modestly. Christopher, Miranda's father, worked on the collective farm as a tractor driver. Mother Cindy Larkins worked there as a milkmaid. Simple, quiet, hard-working people. They received an average wage, kept a large farm. And Badja was chewed up at home. However, a simple countryman could be called only Christopher. With Cindy in it, all was a little more interesting. Christopher was a man of the countryside. Miranda's mother had been born on the road and had lived her entire childhood there with her parents and numerous siblings. Miranda Larkin's grandfather was chairman of the Putilov collective farm. Grandmother Clara worked there as a bookkeeper. Daughter Cindy was born to them just after the war. After about a year, grandfather and grandmother tried to give education to all their children. They encouraged them to read books and be interested in various sciences. Good studies at school. This approach paid off. Cindy's 2 older sisters had already graduated from universities in the city and were slowly making their way into the world. The older brothers were excellent in school. They were predicted a bright future. And Cindy herself studied diligently and was regularly praised by teachers. The girl planned to become a doctor, but fate ordered otherwise. When Cindy was 10 years old, her parents were arrested. Her father was accused of embezzlement and misappropriation of collective farm property. Mother was taken with him for company. Reasoned that the chairman of the collective farm could steal state property with the complicity of the bookkeeper. In fact, there was no embezzlement. There were only inconvenient nationality of the father and an anonymous letter that came on him to the district administration. And then the punitive machine spun very quickly. One evening, 3 children of school children, Cindy, and her 2 brothers were left without parents. Where were the adults taken away? Where to look for them? How long will they serve their sentence? Neither the younger children nor their older sisters, who had traveled from the city to arrange custody, were able to find out. Much later, the older sister told Cindy that the alleged embezzlement was just a pretext for arrest. And at the trial, the prosecutors went all out, portraying the parents as enemies of Soviet power, Zionists, terrorists, and God knows who else, simply because of their nationality. As a child, from the conversations of her elders, Cindy realized that everything was the fault of her parents' positions. Everything is the fault of her parents' positions in a small collective farm. The chairman of the accountant is practically the upper class, the elite. There is always someone who is jealous and wants to live in the light. So, to live a quiet life, you have to keep your head down. So reasoned the 10-year-old girl, especially if you come from a Jewish family. And if your parents were arrested and taken to the camps, it's better to live modestly, but quietly and peacefully, than to make your way into the world, risking your life. No, Cindy didn't drop out. She graduated from high school with honors, and even turned from Cindy to Cindy Larkins. But she did not stop reading books and interested in science and medicine, in particular, subscribing to various general education magazines, watching educational programs on television when it appeared in the house. She was a woman, intelligent, erudite, finely sensitive with excellent artistic taste, but having finished 10 years of school, did not go to the city to enter the institute, and got a job in her native collective farm on the simplest and most inconspicuous job. So she spent her whole life in it, refusing even to be promoted to foreman of milkmaids. It seemed to her that even such an insignificant career advancement would bring danger to her and her family. Cindy's older brothers and sisters left for cities and towns. The girl stayed in her native village. For a while she lived in her parents' house. But soon after graduation, Cindy married Christopher Kendall and moved into a hut, which was allocated to him by the collective farm. The girl for a long time rejected the advances of the visiting guy. It even came to the point that she hid from him in the backyard. But Christopher was persistent and continued to pursue Cindy persistently and methodically. In the end, Cindy summoned him for a conversation and told him about her biography, about her arrested parents. "Should you ruin your life by associating with the daughter of an enemy of the people?" she asked, having finished the story. "So it is necessary." Angrily replied Christopher. "We have a son is not responsible for the father. I forgot. And a daughter is not responsible for her father either." And knowing where these enemies of the people come from, a month later they got married, and a few years later the young built their own house and moved there with their first child. And the house of their beloved parents was empty and decrepit by the time of the birth of their youngest daughter, Miranda. From it remained almost one hulk towering among the weeds and frightening the children, the failing windows. Cindy sometimes took her daughter there. The two of them would walk around the property, jumping on the floor balcony inside the ruins. And Cindy Larkins would tell how things used to be here, and Miranda would listen and memorize. The girl got into the habit of visiting the old house once a week, of spending some time in it talking about the weathered walls, about her life. It seemed to her that her grandparents were invisibly present among these ruins, listening to her and delighted granddaughters' stories. Miranda decided to visit the abandoned house twice a week and strictly adhered to the schedule. Only in winter did she sometimes miss visits in the worst of the frost. The year the girl turned 10, the winter was warm and snowy. One January day, the girl sat in the ruins until almost dusk, telling at home how she and her relatives celebrated the new year. She caught up only when a snowstorm started outside. Miranda, she realized, had to get out, or the path to the street was barely trampled. She'd notice in no time. Heavily, shuffling her feet through the snow, the girl got out on the shriveled porch of the house and saw that a man was sitting on the Leningrad. Looking closer, she realized that the alien had been here for a long time. Small drifts of snow had managed to gather on his shoulders and top. Miranda was wary, but she realized she had nowhere to go. She would have to leave the lot anyway. She couldn't just sit around. She moved forward with determination, reasoned that if a man tried to attack her, she'd raise a ruckus. A dozen meters from the family ruins stood an apartment building. Across the street, another. Would anyone hear her screams? Barely past the lot, the path was already partially snowed over. The girl equaled the fence and found herself a couple steps away from the stranger. Looking closer, Miranda realized that on the remnants of the fence sat a woman, almost an old woman. She was dressed in some inconceivable rags. Her head was covered with a scarf. The old woman's face was unfamiliar, and it was puzzling. The village, though it had grown in recent years, but it was still small. All the inhabitants knew each other in one way or another, but this woman Miranda had never seen. She could have sworn it. The old woman sat motionless and paid no attention to the girl, didn't even turn her head in her direction. She did not seem to see Miranda. The girl began to look at the stranger and suddenly saw that tears were flowing down the alien's cheeks. "Grandmother, why are you crying?" loudly asked Miranda. The old woman did not answer, and it seemed she did not even hear that she was being addressed. The girl repeated the question and then began to shake the old woman by the shoulders. "You're all right. What's wrong? Why are you sitting here?" inquired she. "You're freezing. We should go home. Would you like me to walk you home?" Miranda's efforts were successful. The stranger finally snapped out of her trance and saw the girl. Hearing what she was being told, the old woman only sighed and shook her head. "There's no place for me to go, sweetheart," she said hoarsely, as if in a chicken voice. "I have no home." "But where did you come from?" Miranda wondered. "From afar, sweetheart," said the old woman, still monotonous, like a broken record. "I'll never make it back." How could it be? The girl was seriously upset. For some reason, a strange woman had caught her eye. "You can't just sit here, can you? It'll be night soon. The blizzard's coming. You're freezing to death." The old woman just nodded her head. The prospect of freezing to death didn't seem to bother her at all. "Come with me," Miranda said decisively. "Come and visit us. My parents are good, don't be afraid. And the house is big enough for you to sleep here." and then decide what to do next. She demandingly pulled the stranger by the arm. "Come on, let's go, or he'll notice the road. We'll never make it. My goodness, you've turned into a snowdrift." The girl managed to push the old woman out of the way, rising heavily from the debris of the fence. The stranger followed her. Miranda held the old woman's hand tightly, afraid that she would suddenly change her mind or simply get lost in the snow swirls. They reached the house after dark. Cindy Larkins was peering out the window and, seeing her daughter, jumped out on the porch. "Where they carry you grumpily," she grumbled. I kept my eyes peering. "It's nighttime. The storm is raging. And you are schlepped somewhere." The woman noticed the guest, which her daughter persistently pulled behind her all, and remained silent, then hesitantly spoke. "Hello, Mom. It's Grandma who's lost," Miranda explained. "I brought her to us. She says she doesn't know where her home is or where to go. Let her wait here tonight. We can't let her go out in this weather. We can't." The mother agreed and turned to the old woman and invited her to come in, please. "Here, develop here. You can hang your coat here." Cindy Larkins helped the alien to undress. Under the coat turned out to be worn another one, and under it a glass fungus sole of strange color. It seemed never to have been cleaned once in its life, when all the outer clothes were hoisted on a hanger. The old woman appeared skinny, if not skinny. The shawl from her head, she was reeling, and Cindy Larkins had evidently taken to fiddling, fitting both his topcoat and Valenki. By the stove, Mama was pestering Miranda. It was Granny who said she came from far away. "So she's not from our village. I don't know her. See if you recognize her. Maybe she's a local after all. They say old people sometimes forget where they live." "It happens," the woman responded. She took the old woman to the corner between the stove and the table, the warmest place in the kitchen, seated her on a chair covered with a soft thread, leaned over the guest, looked into her face, and suddenly froze, scrutinizing his features. For several minutes, the two women, old and young, gazing at each other. Miranda became subdued, but looked at them both. She was surprised to hear her mother suddenly ask the old woman in a stern voice, "Laura?" The alien nodded in response and, in turn, asked the landlady Cindy a question. "Cindy Larkins is now Kendall," mumbled the woman and cried. Hugging her guest tightly and resting her nose on the top of her head, the old woman picked up Cindy Larkins, but with both hands she pushed her nose into her chest and, from the sounds of it, cried too. Miranda watched the scene with all her eyes. I think she even forgot to blink. The door slammed behind her. Christopher's father entered the house. After assessing the situation, he loudly asked Cindy what was going on. Yes, Cindy, the same woman, raised her face at her husband, flooded with tears. To Miranda's surprise, it was completely happy. "Meet Christopher," she said. "This is your mother-in-law, Clara. Sarah is my mother." Hugs she did not ponder. And the old woman, though she turned to her son-in-law, continued to hold on to her daughter with both hands. Christopher was quick to recognize the situation. "Pleased to meet you," he said politely to the guest. "So why are you standing there? Let's get the table ready. Grandma, you go, we need to feed. See, Mother is busy. Let's manage." He shook the girl by the shoulder, and only then Miranda was able to shake off her surprised stupor and began to organize in the kitchen. Slar was released from the colony 2 years ago due to the end of his sentence. None of her relatives knew about it, and there was no one to inform her of the release. During the first year of her imprisonment, Slaga strictly forbade her older children to write to her. She was afraid that such correspondence could affect their reputation in a bad way and hinder their future life. After that, she stopped replying to the letters of her daughters and sons, and later she was transferred several times from one camp to another, from place to place. And when her youngest daughter, Cindy, grew old enough to have the right to search for her mother, it was impossible to find her. Cindy sent inquiries to various authorities for several years, but it seems that the bureaucrats and the penal system themselves were confused by the paperwork and were unable to give the young woman a clear answer. I did not know my children's 3 new addresses, and my own old home address, during the time in captivity, have forgotten. She only remembered the name of the village where she had once lived with her husband. That's where she decided to go. The camp authorities issued a certificate of release and some road from the colony to the village, past which the railroad passed. The woman hitched a ride. It was not far to go, about 20 kilometers away. At the station, she spent a long time finding out from the cashier how to get to the village, or rather to the center of the region in which the village was located. She and the cashier figured out the route. But here's the trouble. There were no tickets for passing trains. They said to wait. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe next week. She had nothing to do, so she decided to walk around the village near the station. The village was small, not very well maintained. There were no sights or amenities, but the woman didn't care. She was delighted by the very possibility of walking anywhere, without having to answer to anyone and without fear of breaking any rules. She wandered through the streets and alleys, looking at houses and yards, rubbing the backs of stray dogs. Sit down to rest on benches by the fences. It was September. Trees in golden foliage looked incredibly beautiful. The weather was warm and the air was fresh. Clara lost track of time, and when she found herself on the outskirts of the village, she was surprised to notice that it was beginning to get dark. The old woman moved back towards the station, hoping to spend the night at the tiny station. But at that moment, someone hit her hard on the back of the head. Clara fell to the ground and lost consciousness. She woke up in complete darkness and found herself lying in the storm. I tried to get up, but the back of my head hurt treacherously. My head was spinning. My throat was receding, nausea sticking from the fence. The woman sank back down into the thicket, examined herself under the giving grasses, arms, legs intact. Her head was not pierced. No blood, but thickets all around. The knot of Kaz is not rich yet. Not there either. I'm angry. What kind of robber went for old rags and a loaf of bread? Nearly took his life. Who do you think you're robbing? You can tell from a mile away that she's an ex-convict. They see them regularly in the village. They've learned to recognize them by now. But then Clara noticed that she wasn't wearing a trench coat and groped her body and clothes. The woman realized not only her poor belongings were stolen, the certificate of release and the little money she had were gone too. And that was a problem. She couldn't leave without her papers. The only way to legally buy a ticket from here was to show her ID. She couldn't get a passport either. And she was supposed to register with the police within a certain period of time, get a residence permit, and settle some bureaucratic formalities. If she doesn't do that, she'll go back to jail. Shit, I don't want to do that. Even the loss of money didn't bother him as much as the loss of the certificate. But what to do? Where to go? With a complaint of robbery, the woman could not understand. In fact, she couldn't even run. When she tried to stand upright, she began to feel dizzy. Consciousness threatened to leave her long-suffering head. Little by little, her eyes became accustomed to the darkness, and Clara could see a small barn nearby behind a low fence. The woman crawled toward it, climbing over the fence, which, fortunately, was no higher than her knee, climbed inside and entrenched herself in Navalny in the construction of the hayloft. I'll give it up for a while, she thought, and then I'll decide how to be, not to lie under the fence. With this thought, Ravine fell asleep. She was awakened by the owner of the barn, who noticed the intrusion into his territory. He was a sturdy old man. He swore at first, but not in a mean way. What are you doing with that fence? My flower has fallen. He got angry. You could have knocked on the house, asked to spend the night like a human being. Wouldn't he have let you in? We are all human beings. We all treat your brother with understanding. However, having heard about the alarm about what had happened, the muzhik stopped grumbling. He brought his suddenly and guests water and a crust of bread, and himself disappeared, to return soon with a policeman and a local paramedic. The police representative questioned Riva in detail about what had happened to her during the night. He examined the territory, asked for written explanations from the old woman and from the owner of the plot. The paramedic examined the old woman and diagnosed her with a concussion. At least a couple weeks of bed rest was recommended. The man, who introduced himself as Stephen, carried her into the house, arranged her on a shell bed in the kitchen, told her to rest and gain strength. Anyway, until your documents are resolved, you will not be able to go anywhere, he explained. Stephen said that Clara was not the first in their village to be attacked. For a year now, there have been some kind of seagulls in the neighborhood, hunting for ex-convicts. To recognize them among the locals was simple criminals Spodaroatel, or people who came out of the camp and poked them intimidated, and sometimes just attacked from the back and publicized, as it happened with Lika, and then robbed afterward. Why? The old woman was perplexed. What good would they do to us? There's nothing to take from us. No property, not even pennies on the road. Oh, you silly Clara, Stephen lamented. And the documents are a certificate of release. That's their main prey. And that's what they're after. And what do they do with certificates? Do they get free train tickets? I continued to wonder. Do they need those tickets? Waved Stephen away. You understand that the most important thing in the certificate is that you can get a real passport with it. No check will not dig up. And with this passport, you can do so much with it, or sell it for good money. And these crooks know exactly who needs such a document. They correct the certificates in Ashen as they need them. They change the year of birth, change the photo, glue it to these papers at the passport office. They look very closely, especially if the passport office is far from the camp. So they go far away. And then they use the stolen documents to get passports. That's what our district officer told me, he explained. These bastards have been hanging around here for a long time, but they can't catch them. They're running all over the neighborhood. And with their traveling, it's all over the country. The effects of the concussion took a long time to wear off. Her weakness became her constant companion. She stayed at Stephen's for over a month. During this time in the local militia, you gave the woman a new certificate, and she received a passport here in the village. You had to go to the permanent place of residence to get the documents. There was no time to go there. The legal deadline was coming to an end. Stephen persuaded the old woman to winter at his place. The man lived alone. His parents had died long ago. He had no wife and children. His brothers and sisters were partly scattered across the country and partly taken away by the war. He was glad to be alive. He was glad to have a soul in the house. He reasoned that it was worth to gain strength and recover before a long trip. Besides, the winter promised cold, and there were no warm clothes. Until the end of May, she lived in the house of her savior, kept house, cooked food. She worked part-time as a cleaner in the village Novi Club, in order to save at least a little money for the road to her native village. When summer came, she got ready to go. She felt better, noticeably stronger. She felt less dizzy. And what about the occasional memory lapse? She tried to ignore that. She said goodbye warmly to Stephen. The man had packed her a substantial bag of provisions for the journey and wanted to give her some money, but she decided that her own savings would suffice. The journey was supposed to take a couple of weeks, but somehow it took almost a year and a half. How come? Leek didn't finish listening. Fell asleep exhausted by the events of the evening. Already later she mentioned that at some point she forgot where she was going. And when she came to her senses, she found herself at an unfamiliar station with no provisions and almost no money. She traveled part of the way on foot. Sometimes she caught a hitchhiker, rode as a hare between the train cars, asked for alms, asked for lodging in villages, slept at the stations, on benches, wherever she had to. And when after all the ordeals she finally reached Putilov and saw her native house in ruins, she almost lost her mind. It became clear that the long journey had been made in vain. There were no relatives. There was nowhere to bow one's head. Of course, one could walk through the village, look for people who remembered her, stay with them. But the old woman was afraid. She still didn't know which of the villagers had written that unfortunate anonymous letter about her and Larkins. But just in case, she trusted no one else. From fatigue and confusion, the old woman fell into a kind of mental trance. In this state, she sat on the cook fence of her former home for over an hour. She would surely have frozen there if Miranda hadn't noticed her. Destiny. The adults alone spoke with significance. It's all mysterious. Others echoed them. I thought nothing was fate. There was no mysticism and mystery in her meeting with her grandmother. It's just that for so many years she'd been calling her home. With her constant stories, with her presence in her house, Grandma just couldn't help but hear. So it's all right. The Kendalls had set up Slaga in a passageway room. The rest of the rooms in the house were occupied. Daughter and son-in-law fixed up the old lady. Did the department grant her a pension? By spring, Clara recovered from her long journey and joined the life of the family. Cindy Larkins clearly thanked all the gods in the world every day for bringing her mother back. Miranda adored her grandmother, even though she was not a sugary character. The old lady was her own free-spirited, risk-taking self, but her relatives forgave her for it. Everyone realized that if she had been God's dandelion, she simply would not have survived either in the camp or after it. Cindy wrote to her sisters and brothers about her mother's return, and all summer long the Kendall family had a pilgrimage of guests, of joyful guests. Was that summer happy, filled with the brightest emotions? But with the onset of fall, a serious problem arose in the house. She began to scream in her sleep, talking loudly with interlocutors unknown to anyone. "Give me my bread, or all the assholes are pulling," she shrieked in the middle of the night. "The certificate. My certificate. Where is it? They'll put me back in camp without it. I don't want to." The scream woke up the family. The next night, everything hurts inside. The old woman read in the night, without thinking, "The eye of the bishop. Why such a punishment? It's like I'm being torn to pieces," she called at the top of her voice. "Fooled him. Where are you dragging him? You bastards." These cries woke up the whole house. At first, they were repeated about once a week. But by midwinter, Clara was getting the whole family out of bed every day. She herself remembered nothing of the bad dreams or her screams, but would only shut up when her daughter or grandchildren pulled her out of her sleep. The old woman was embarrassed by the trouble she caused her loved ones, but she couldn't help herself. Sleeping pills and sedatives that the village paramedic offered did not help. After them, on the contrary, it became more difficult to wake up the old woman during her nightmares. She should be treated in a psychoneurological dispensary, thoughtfully said the local medic Cindy. At these words exploded. "Do you want me to send my own mother to a mental institution? That's the last thing we need." But nevertheless, Kendall's life was becoming increasingly difficult. The family stopped getting enough sleep. Grandma's seizures could recur several times a night, and there was no rest in between. Christopher and Cindy became irritable. They often complained of fatigue. No wonder, because after restless nights they had to go to work. Yes, it's not easy shifting papers in a warm office. And doing physical labor. Miranda and her older brother also felt the impact of not having enough to eat, although it was a little easier for them as children than for adults. It went on like this until the spring. By May, Cindy Larkins was ready, if not to accept the paramedic's suggestion that the old woman be treated in a mental hospital, then at least to discuss it further. She and her husband were completely exhausted and didn't know what to do. Miranda, hearing the conversation of the elders, realized that the grandmother would not approve of the treatment. Moreover, she would be angry at her daughter for such a decision. And then Miranda would be angry with her. The girl suggested to her mother to move the old woman to her room. She lived in the farthest corner of the house from her parents' bedroom and hoped that from there she would not hear her scream so much. "She'll give you no peace at all," Cindy Larkins lamented. "So what?" Miranda waved it off. "It's summer. I don't have to get up for school during the day. At least you and Daddy will have a rest." Was the girl so convincing, Mother? Too exhausted. But soon the old woman's relocation took place. The first few nights the girl swore, jumping out of bed, hearing another scream. However, after a few days she thought that it was possible to try to cope with the grandmother after a nightmare sleep and forced booth. The old lady fell asleep for a long time, noise contrived, complaining about the fact that it disturbs her granddaughter. It's exhausting even more than her shouting, and Miranda decided to come up with a way to soothe her without waking her from sleep. At first, the girl simply approached her grandmother, barely hearing her voice, stroked her head, and on her hands quietly and affectionately coaxed her. "It's a dream, Grandma," she repeated patiently. "It's not real. It's all right. You are at home. No one is hurting you. Mommy and Daddy are there for you. They'll protect you." But the old woman just didn't hear her granddaughter. And then Miranda devised another plan. The next night in the next bed, there were cries. "That's my bread, give it back, to whom I say, you shameful thief." Miranda sneaked up on her grandmother and spoke persuasively. "Here's your bread, girl. Nobody's taking it away from you. I took it to salt you with salt, it tastes better. Here." The girl repeated it several times, and suddenly Clara heard her. "It tastes better with salt," she agreed. "Thank you. Forgive me, I was scared." The old woman turned sideways and fell asleep peacefully. Miranda froze enthusiastically at her bedside. Had it really worked? The rest of the night passed surprisingly quietly. In the morning, the lyricist rose awake before noon. She wanted to tell her grandmother about the night's events, but with some sixth sense she realized that it was not worth it. Instead, she asked her grandmother, "You sometimes yell about bread at night. Did someone really take it away from you?" "True," the old woman replied reluctantly. "I had just been brought to the first camp in Barak, and there was a woman who tried to take my rations. I attacked her. Where did the anger come from? I don't know." My grandmother was silent, and then she added, "But you know, I remember now that she gave me back my piece. She said she wanted to salt it." Miranda nodded her head. She didn't know how the story of the stolen harmonica really ended, but she suspected that the outcome was not as peaceful as her grandmother saw it today. She remembered the phrase about salt from a dream in which her granddaughter had intervened. The girl decided to continue her experiments, but not only to appease her grandmother, but also out of research interest. The next night, barely beyond the dream, she began to wail pitifully. "Everything hurts, like it's tearing me to pieces from the inside." Miranda immediately crept over to her bedside and spoke closer. "Get some rest. Here is the most modern medicine for you. You take it. Everything will go away. Everything will stop hurting. Good for you." As if letting go, muttered the grandmother a moment after the girl's words. "Of course," confirmed Miranda. "The pain will go away now. You sleep. You'll wake up and forget everything." Soon the old woman stopped moaning. She sang and even curled up under the blanket. Miranda realized that the nightmare had receded. Once again, the grandmother slept peacefully until morning. But the next day, her granddaughter did not ask her about the nightmare. Determined not to awaken her memories, Miranda took the experiment seriously. She kept a notebook in which she noted how often she talked to Clara in her sleep, how quickly she calmed down, whether the attack was repeated, and soon noticed from her notes that the nightmares in which she managed to wedge in repeated less and less often, and after a few months and disappeared altogether. This encouraged the young explorer even more. In her for a flicker of hope that it will be possible to completely cure her grandmother of night attacks. And soon this hope was confirmed. Nightmares began to visit her less and less often. Sometimes Miranda slept through the night without her screams. Sometimes you only had to get up to her once a night. But there was no more like the beginning of last fall, when Slaga read every 2 o'clock. Miranda considered it her small victory. Not always the girl managed to calm the old woman with the first time to pick up the words. For example, when Clara started calling for her husband and screaming to let him go, she usually had to be woken up. "Miranda, I tried telling her your husband wasn't taking him anywhere." But the old woman didn't believe it. She'd spent too many years without her husband. She remembered the separation, too well. The phrase, "we'll figure it all out and bring your husband back." No one of Slava's age would have believed such a statement from the law enforcement officers. Miranda went through the phrases. I wrote down the unsuccessful ones. Finally, she guessed to address her grandmother as if on behalf of her grandfather and promise her that he would surely survive and they would meet again. Soon after this discovery, Clara's most agonizing nightmare gradually let her go. Before the start of the school year, Cindy Larkin suggested that her daughter move her grandmother from her bedroom back into the pass-through room, but Miranda refused. She reported to her mother that Clara had become a much more restful sleeper. Cindy had noted this herself, although her daughter's room was away from the bedroom. At first, she often heard the usual night noises from there, but by the end of the summer, such episodes became fewer and fewer. After rejection, she was glad several times to the door of her room at night, hearing her mother's voice and eavesdropping on what was going on. Finding out what was going on, Cindy Larkins pondered the situation and went to hold a consultation with the local paramedic. He approved of Miranda's methodology. The doctor talked to the girl, read her diary of observations of her grandmother, asked about the results, and afterwards he praised Miranda fervently, saying that if she continued her experiment, she would be able to cure her grandmother completely. He explained for a long time how and why the method invented by Miranda works. He said some wise words the girl did not understand even half of it. But she did. She's on the right track. A year later, a peaceful sleep returned to Kendall's house. She stopped screaming at night. And if she had a nightmare, the family knew how to calm her down quickly. They didn't tell the grandmother herself. They just tried to treat her as kindly as possible. Miranda could be proud of herself, but she had no time for that. She judged the paramedic for a while to explain to her how things had turned out in simple words. To the medic's credit, he did not dismiss the curious girl and managed to lay out his assumptions for her. In addition, he recommended several popular scientific publications from which you can understand how the human psyche works. The subject fascinated Miranda, and she plunged headlong into the study of psychology. First on the basics, and then more seriously. By the end of school, the girl already knew exactly what she wanted to devote her life to and did not retreat from her decision. All this long story Miranda told the parents of her future son-in-law. Of course, it was much shorter. Although David constantly intervened in the narration, clarified the details, drew the listener's attention to the details. He himself had heard this story not for the first time and liked it very much. He admired the ingenuity of little Miranda, the selflessness with which she took to help her grandmother, the patience and warmth of heart she showed during her impromptu healing session. I would never have thought of this at 11 years old, the young man exclaimed. Among other things, David was struck by the very history of the Kendall family. Born in the mid-90s, he had not seen the Soviet Union, and about repressions, camps, persecutions on ethnic grounds. He knew the KGB and NKVD only through excerpts from old movies and history books. It was strange for the young boy to encounter people who had actually seen and experienced all this. He was especially surprised that these people were not stale old men, but quite cheerful and adequate people. His future father-in-law and mother-in-law, Kelly and John. Miranda's story impressed him too. After it, they had a long conversation about the vicissitudes of fate, about how childhood events influenced the choice of profession, about the Soviet era, about human kindness. The discussion of the wedding was not just on the second, but on the 10th plan. But the conversation turned out to be sincere and heartfelt, and by feelings Jenkins brought the future relatives closer, despite their difference in age, education, and social status. After all, that was the purpose of the joint dinner. So at least, reasoned Miranda. Parted at 0 o'clock, for the city elders left by cab. David stayed at the bride's apartment. They are sunny, sent the parents to bed, and themselves cleaned the table, went through the dishes, tidied up the living room and kitchen. The guy thought that he was obliged to help the future relatives, at least in this, since he was not allowed to help in the organization of the dinner, which was held for him, and therefore he did not know that, returning home, His mother said to her husband, "How do you like that? John, we're going to have a hereditary Jewess in our family, and from a family with a criminal record. I was hoping David would find a better match." "Okay," John responded to you. He didn't pick anything. He's in love with this thread and her family wholeheartedly. Do you care if she's Jewish or Turkish with a criminal record or a spotless one? They have plenty of money. Pensions for doctors of sciences, a decent apartment. You've seen for yourself what a great party they are in material terms. And you and I don't need anything else. We decided to get married in 6 months in September. I didn't want beautiful fall photos under the dress. David was not against it, and parents amicably decided not to hinder the newlyweds and not to impose their ideas about the celebration. While the bride and groom were saving money for the party, outfits, treats, and a bachelorette party, it was decided long ago that after the wedding, the young people will live at Jenkins and save money for the down payment on the mortgage. And they should have thought about their careers. Both boys had little seniority, couldn't afford to borrow much money from the bank, and the salaries were not such that painlessly pay off the loan for housing. Miranda and Sebastian were completely satisfied with this solution. They found it reasonable in their large apartment with 3 isolated rooms. There was enough space for both parents and the young family. But the out-of-towners didn't like the idea for some reason. But openly, they did not express their protests. John, in mail conversations with Sebastian, he periodically complained that the son does not act according to the rules. They said that a man should bring his wife to his house and not move to her. Jenkins on these speeches only guffawed. It's all prejudice and long out of date. John came in, on the other hand. But a young family, come to think of it, they want to make some noise sometimes. But during this very time, and there are parents behind the wall, you have to admit, it's embarrassing. Imagine yourself in such a situation and will never have grandchildren. You've been here, John. Sebastian wondered. From the thread and the room to our half of the apartment. How noisy do you have to be for us to hear, unless you yell into a microphone? Would the guests want to invite us to a party? I guess, John. People need a place to gather with their friends. Or they'll just sit up late watching TV, and you'll be noisy at 0 o'clock. We're fine, smiled Jenkins. Yeah, agreed, was John. I remember Miranda wasn't used to being kept up at night by the noise from the in-laws. Sebastian gave his companion a serious look, raised an eyebrow questioningly. I mean that she could endure the inconvenience for a long time for the sake of the people closest to her and not say anything to them about it. Tactfully, I'm a woman, John quickly mouthed and curtailed the subject. There was no need to quarrel with the future in-laws yet. Kelly was more subtle. Over a cup of tea, she could complain to Miranda. David, the other day, my boy was frying cutlets. I come in. Oh my goodness. The whole kitchen's smoky. The stove's got grease on the coffee. Splashes on the table flour scattered. And he sits in front of a mountain of cutlets and says I'm treating my mom. And he doesn't notice what he's turned the kitchen into. You have to be such a Bezrukov. Grown-ups are already on the torture. You're with him, Miranda. Not scared. He was joking. Kelly, you haven't seen what goes on in our kitchen. After Sebastian's fish fry. The man is incorrigible. Kelly nodded, but by the next meeting, she'd start all over again, all over me. Would you be comfortable living with Slovaks? After all, a stranger in the house, and besides, a young man just so from the morning from the bedroom in a nightgown will not jump out of the bedroom. I have never been in the habit of jumping out of the bedroom unclothed, Miranda objected softly. David is no stranger to us. He's stayed overnight, or on weekends more than once. We've never been inconvenienced. Don't worry, Kelly. No worries at all. It's one thing to have him as a guest, and quite another to have him as a permanent resident. And that you're getting tired of this topic being mooted. You guys can't have a life. You yourself understand it perfectly well. And to rent an apartment, it is not rational at their incomes that the newlyweds settled for the city could not be out of the question. Everyone understood that. The David family lived in a 2-room adjoining Khrushchevka, where the guy owned a passageway room. When he was a teenager, he tried to persuade his father to make repairs and isolate his room. But John quickly explained to his son the unreality of this idea. Expensive, messy, troublesome. The room would be cramped. The apartment will be blocked by a dark, long corridor, which is not used rationally. In addition, because of this, redevelopment will reduce the living area of their Khrushchevka, which will lead to a drop in its value. In short, unprofitable from all sides. David then reconciled, blocked off part of the room with a closet, thus allocating himself a personal space, and about the repair shut up. Later, getting acquainted with Robert, he sometimes regretted that he did not show insistence to bring the girl in a separate room. Although tiny, it still goes anywhere, but in the country behind the closet is simply impossible. The current hints of David's parents only annoyed, especially since for the city expressed their thoughts not only Jenkins Sr., but also Netta. For example, one day Kelly took the future daughter-in-law to the cat show, and their threads looked at one of the kittens, a red and fluffy Maine Coon. The girl more than half an hour stood near his cage, admiring and pleasing. "So let's buy him," Kelly suggested. "I'll add to you if you don't have enough." "You can't," sighed Lisa. "Dad's allergic to cats." "Then get the breeder's contacts and buy one after the wedding," Kelly suggested. And then, as if she'd come to her senses, she added, "Oh, you'll be living with your parents anyway. If only you had your own apartment." Slowly, Kelly and John put their future daughters-in-law into the family's heads. The idea that the young ones needed their own place. Eventually, Miranda got fed up with it. She summoned the town's spouses for a talk, and she called David and Robert and her husband. "Kelly, John," she began, "we've all noticed that you don't like the prospect of David living in our apartment after the wedding. Let's discuss this situation once and for all. First, let's admit to each other that we have no alternatives. The young people will not be able to live with you. This will inevitably lead to domestic conflicts. We are not in a position to buy an apartment. We don't have that kind of money. We do not intend to exchange our existing housing. You, as far as I understand, you also do not have the financial means to evict David. Otherwise, you would have done it a long time ago." John shook his head. "No," he admitted, "except for a down payment. We could scrape together a studio of some kind." "Not a studio," Lisa resented. "If you're going to mess with the mortgage, then buy a full-fledged apartment, albeit one room they used to fly. Where is the room combined with the kitchen? Well, we'd probably add something to your money for a down payment, but we don't have a lot of money. I warn you, we'll get a one-room Khrushchevka somewhere in the suburbs. And the guys are still more comfortable living in the center. It's not far to work, and there's all the infrastructure. They can't rent an apartment and save for a mortgage at the same time. So, I believe, moving in with us, David, is the only sensible decision, especially since the children made it themselves. We expect it won't be for long." David cut in. 5 years at the most. "But that's me calculating the worst-case scenarios. Moreover," said Sebastian, "we will help by providing housing and not requiring the kids to contribute to the household expenses, so as not to slow down the rate of savings. But I would object to the expenses," said David. "I don't like to be a freeloader, and we will discuss it." "If necessary," Miranda responded immediately. "That's what the situation looks like so far. Maybe you see some other ways to solve it that the four of us don't see." She turned to Kelly with John, for the townspeople looked at each other, shrugged confusedly. "Not yet, it seemed," Kelly said. "In that case, let's consider it a done deal," Jenkins summarized. "And please don't start any more conversations about how inconvenient it is for anyone or how wrong it is in general. It's tedious and uncomfortable," Smith's words added, and almost with glee. Kelly and John had to agree before the wedding. They kept their heads down and didn't broach the subject of bridal real estate again. All the more did not remember the idea to organize on the day of their marriage. For Kelly and John, the future mother-in-law was only in favor, but he himself categorically did not want a second ceremony. Realizing that the man cannot change his mind, Lisa said, well, and the hell with it, come up with something more interesting. And came up with as a bachelorette party arranged all the close women, including Miranda and Kelly, masked photo shoot in wedding dresses. For this event, she invited several makeup artists and hairdressers, conspired with a rental salon to provide outfits and space, and with a nearby restaurant about a small buffet. The ladies were a little shy at first, but the champagne abundance of outfits around did their job. Soon, everyone invited, with pleasure and excitement, tried on dresses, posed for photographers, tested unusual makeup. The party turned out very girlish and yet romantic. No, she was pleased. And Kelly later told her in confidence that even re-registration with her husband would not have given her so much joy and pleasure. In short, there was no time to discuss where the new family would live. However, John had prepared a surprise for the wedding dinner. The dinner was modest. Only the young people and their parents celebrated the marriage. With friends, David and Robert decided the next day, and immediately after the registry office and photo shoot went with their relatives to a cozy restaurant. David, in the city of excellent cuisine and service of extra class. When the turn came to handing out gifts, the new father-in-law solemnly rose from his seat and said, guys, I decided as a gift to buy you an apartment. Here are the documents. He held out to the newlyweds a thin folder. I thought, he continued, that my savings are enough either for a ready-made studio or a two-bedroom. But for the construction phase, I mean the down payment. Of course, I wouldn't be able to afford the whole thing. But so far my earnings are stable, and one good contract should be coming up soon. So I got in touch with a real estate developer. And now we have a two-room apartment near the center. True, the house is still at the foundation stage, but the builder is reliable. I checked. It's scheduled for completion in 2 years. They're giving it to you with renovation. Just move in and live. Once it's built, now we'll register the house with you. In the meantime, the loan is on me, and I'll pay. It's a gift after all. The news made a lot of noise around the table. Robert and her husband and parents went to see the house under construction a couple of days later. The new building was indeed very well located in the so-called quiet center. The neighborhood was green and cozy. Not far from the house were stores of basic necessities, kindergarten, school. There was a prospective apartment in the next block. Sebastian grinned, and with grandchildren will be comfortable to live. And the manager who accompanied them would also confirm. We have in the project provides wheelchairs on the first floor, ramps at each porch, and a great playground in a closed courtyard. And the whole territory is under video surveillance. You can even let one child go for a walk and not worry about his safety. Jenkins' senior impression, and nodded approvingly. She didn't let this information pass her ears. She looked at the floor plans with curiosity, looked for her future apartment on the floor plan. And when she found it, it seems that she immediately began to arrange the furniture there in her imagination. A representative of the developer took the families to a neighboring building, recently commissioned by his company. Some of the apartments in it were still empty, and it was possible to get inside and look at the renovation by the builders, and generally assess the quality of housing. After this trip, even David, who had previously been skeptical about his father's gift, felt grateful to John and began to dream of moving. Great, Sebastian exclaimed on the way home. Here he was being a friend to you, and here's a royal gift for you guys. But for now, he's not splurging too much. It's cool, Miranda noticed. At the foundation stage, these apartments are cheap enough. Not a penny, of course. But for our 3-bedroom, we can get 3 2-bedrooms like this. He'll splurge later when he starts paying off the loan. I suggested to my father that we pay off the loan. David responded immediately, but he refused. He said it was his gift. It was the best we could do. What is this? Us taking over the mortgage after we move in? When the apartment's built, when it's finished, my dad'll transfer it to us. We'll live and pay for it then. Until then, he's on his own. Is it a big payment? Asked Sebastian, and hearing the amount, whistled delightedly. Almost my entire pension, shocked the matchmaker. He says that as long as his income allows, David explained. Yes, he is also counting on some contract with Europe, which will supposedly provide him and my mom with income for eternity. I don't know much about his business affairs, finished the young man, a little embarrassed. You don't need it. You have your own work to do, Miranda reassured her son-in-law. But God willing, it will all work out. Basically, nothing has changed yet, Lisa said thoughtfully. We are still living with you and still saving money. Only now it's not for the mortgage, but for renovation and furniture. Let's see how this developer shows himself. Although it will be a pity, of course, if something is delayed. That was that. David settled down in Robert's room, moved his things and computer, and set up his own workspace. He really got along with his wife's parents without any problems. Of course, there were some little things in terms of everyday life, which had to get used to anew. But it was perceived and mighty with his father-in-law as an inevitable stage of lapping, and did not cause violent emotions. In general, the two families coexisted in one apartment quite peacefully. On weekdays, they did not see each other very often. The young ones worked late, and after work they usually went to some events like concerts in bars, theater performances, or just visiting friends. The older generation had their own thing going on. Sebastian continued to work part-time at his institute, and on weekends he went fishing, including in winter. Julia counseled privately and worked with students, helping them write academic papers and conducting research. Officially, the Jenkins seniors were retired, but they could not imagine life without work. Once a month, the families would stop by the construction site and were pleased to see that the house where their apartment would be located was coming up. The construction was strictly on schedule, and in some aspects even ahead of schedule. And David and Robert gradually got used to the idea that they would live here. Little by little, they got acquainted with the neighborhood, planned the situation in the future housing. Even Robert's parents had already accepted the idea and were discussing their children's plans with no less enthusiasm than they were. Nothing foreshadowed trouble. Moreover, John made regular installments on the loan to the builder. Thus passed about half a year. Towards spring, the Jenkins noticed that John had become nervous and anxious. Sebastian called him for a conversation and learned at the conclusion of the contract with European partners, on which the man had pinned so much hope, for some reason stalled. We'll have to tighten our belts, it seems, sighed the matchmaker. With the current customer, we have a contract ends in May. Will he renew it or not? We don't know yet, and it's not a very convenient customer. In general, he will get discounts from us when renewing. How's that sound? And where will I get them from? We're already working with him at almost cost price. I also bought some equipment specifically for the Europeans. The money is spent, and the equipment is idle. They didn't know what John Jenkins was doing. Even David couldn't explain to them the specifics of his father's company, some kind of small production. But what kind of manufacturing? What does it produce and who does it sell to? No one knew. John himself, starting to talk about the work, began to rush with obscure terms, from which the interlocutors quickly tired. So his explanations did not add clarity. But Sebastian understood the holy financial crisis. John, with the mortgage you pulled so far or help? He asked. Pulled until God willing, the man responded. However, a couple months later, John came to Jenkins and said to Sebastian, Listen, Saint, help. I can't take any more credit. I scraped together the last pennies for the last payment, and I don't know where to get money for the next one. I work alone. You know, Kelly, we're all looking out for ourselves. She's no help at all. What are you talking about, John? Sebastian exclaimed. I'll help, of course. We're not strangers. And the apartment is being built not only for your son, but also for my daughter. Tell me where to transfer and by what date. I'll do it. Thanks, my brother-in-law helped me out. By next month, I'll have it up and running, John promised. Oh, and don't tell the kids, please. It's embarrassing. He said it was a small gift for the wedding, and now he's left with nothing. I won't tell, Sebastian reassured his relative. I'm not going to tell you, I guess. I have a stash that my wife doesn't know about, just for such occasions, so don't worry, we'll save your reputation. John thanked Jenkins profusely. He promised it was just a one-time thing. By the next installment, everything would be fine. But it turned out that Sebastian paid for the apartment under construction for the next year. John returned his money to him only twice, and then, not completely discouraged, and with the crisis in his company, David and Robert said nothing. The guys continued to travel regularly to the construction site and plan the move. The building where their future apartment was located was already erected, and they were excitedly measuring the floor among the still bare concrete walls and deciding where to put the sofa, where to place the table, and in which corner a floor lamp would look better. Jenkins didn't want to deprive them of this joy, but Miranda had to confess her collusion with the saint. There is no wife who doesn't know about her spouse's stash, even if it's kept in a bank account and managed solely from a private office. Miranda noticed that her husband began to look more often than usual into the internet bank, which he had not used before, that by a certain day of the month he began to check the status of his cards, to transfer something somewhere. She didn't bother with suspicions. She just asked directly. Sebastian, who was not used to having secrets from his wife, gave in at once. Jenkins listened to the story, thought a little, and said thoughtfully, "God forbid that everything should be all right," and ended with an incomprehensible phrase for her husband, "Good that you transfer the money from your account, not cash." However, Sebastian did not pay attention to this remark. A few more months passed before John showed up at Jenkins with a penitent look. He arrived on a weekend when the entire population of the apartment and the younger and older ones were home. Gathering everyone in the kitchen, he began to get upset. Came to apologize, "Comrades. The contract I had so hoped for is obviously no more. With old clients, my contracts are over. All in all, my firm is almost bankrupt. I've decided to sell it for a blood loss. I'm sorry, guys, I know I promised you, but I'm not holding out." "How do you mean sell it?" David was surprised. "What do you mean?" "Directly," John said sadly. "I'll put it up for sale under an assignment agreement, so sell it to us. Lissa found it right away. We will continue to pay off the loan." "And what will I use to pay off my work debts?" John sighed. "I can't charge you for the apartment. I'll take it from an outside buyer, especially since I already have one in mind. But I'm sorry, guys, I know you were hoping. But I promise you, as soon as things get better, I'll buy you a better apartment than this one." Robert and David and Sebastian. There was a lot of noise for a while, suggesting options. Miranda was silent, scrutinizing the matchmaker. Sebastian came out to escort John to the entrance and asked in a low voice, "Hey, matchmaker, and my money, which I gave for the loan, will you give back from the sale?" We'll decide, said the city quickly. "I'm in a hurry. I'm running." A longing settled in the Jenkins apartment. The young people were upset and discouraged. They were too used to thinking of this new building as their own. They had too many plans for it. Sebastian was worried about the money he'd spent for nothing. John, after apologizing, hadn't visited in over a month, and he was unavailable by phone. Kelly made long conversations, but did not report on her husband's affairs, claiming that she knew nothing about them. One evening, after making sure the children were firmly entrenched in their room, Miranda called her husband into the kitchen and handed him some printouts. "What are these?" Sebastian asked, puzzled. "It's data from the Roserister website," she explained. "John are far away sold. Even before he repented to us, he came the day before. He didn't mention the debts. He didn't say anything to you. When I asked him, he said we'll figure it out. That's all." Sebastian studied the documents, then shook his head in confusion. "He's a fraud, our matchmaker, sadly," Miranda summarized. "Why did you jump right in?" "Sebastian, the man's in a financial crisis. What's in it for him?" He embarrassed himself. He embarrassed himself in front of his kids. He doesn't give a damn about his kids or ours. Miranda was angry. And Sebastian's benefit is very simple and transparent. He bought this apartment at the foundation stage a year and a half ago. Since then, and the dollar rate has grown, and the situation on the real estate market has changed, and the apartment has gone up. I saw it myself. The house is almost ready. Now this 2-bedroom is $6 million more expensive than when he bought it. I checked. Look at this. John took out a loan with no down payment. There was a developer's promotion, and he only made 5 6-month payments. So he didn't spend more than $200,000. And now he sold the apartment, paid off the rest of the loan, and got about $4 million. That's a nice profit. In a year and a half with that kind of investment, it's a good profit, Sebastian agreed. But what makes you think it's fraud? That he thought it all out in advance and acted, as they say, in self-interest. Yes, if only because he hasn't paid you back yet. Even though he has the money from the sale, Miranda replied reasonably. It's been a month, by the way. And he hasn't even shown his face to us. Everyone hides during that time. Apparently, he's not going to give anything back. What was the point of the whole show to promise the kids an apartment? He could have just bought it for himself, waited for it to go up in value and sold it. Sebastian, but you're like a little kid, really. The woman didn't know whether to be angry or upset. Without the show, he'd have to pay the mortgage himself. So most of his mortgage was paid for. You figure you're paying for your daughter's house. Sebastian didn't have time to answer. The door opened and David came into the kitchen. David, I'm sorry, he said, slightly embarrassed, but more wary. I overheard part of your conversation. Sebastian, is that right? You paid the mortgage instead of your father. Jenkins nodded. And he didn't pay you back? The boy kept asking. Sebastian shook his head. David lowered his eyes. He was quiet for a moment. We have some savings, he said. Finally, how much does your father owe you? I can pay you back that money. There are savings and well, grumbled Sebastian. Let it sit. It'll come in handy. A son can't answer for his father, can he? The man winked mockingly at his son-in-law. And I'll pay for my mistakes myself. Maybe I'll still be able to persuade John. Let me talk to him myself, David suggested. It's easier for me. I don't think he's hiding from me. Talk if you want to, Miranda nodded. I don't think so. Are you really going to convince him of anything? That money wasn't good for us, Sebastian explained. I mean, it wasn't the last money we gave him. No offense, it was just a rainy day fund. You know, age. You gotta be prepared for all sorts of illnesses and stuff. But it's a shame. David, you know. I understand, nodded the guy. I'm offended and ashamed too. I thought you were going to call me out of the house after all this, and Robert. I'll talk to my dad. He finished and stalked out of the kitchen. John really wasn't hiding from his son, but he laughed at his requests to return the money he'd paid Jenkins. What money are you talking about? He was surprised. I didn't borrow from him. I didn't give him any receipts. I didn't promise to pay him back. He offered to help me when he found out about my difficulties. So I took him up on it. So he thought he was paying the rent for me and the thread. The boy objected. But what did he think? Stretched John mockingly. Yes, I promised you that apartment. But I overdid it. I didn't calculate my possibilities. But it was registered to me. So I'm the owner. I bought it when I wanted, sold it when I wanted. What's your beef? So you bought it with someone else's money. David was outraged. And why someone else's? Explain, shook his head father. A relative helped me. A close person. Do you consider him a stranger too? You live in his house, don't you? Aren't you ashamed? So pay back your relative. David tried his best to speak calmly, not reacting to his father's taunts. And you prove that it was a debt. John grinned. There was no debt. It was voluntary contributions. That was nice of the family. There was no debt. At last the men shouted at each other, and their conversation turned into a real quarrel. David achieved nothing for his father-in-law, but firmly promised his father that until Sebastian got his money back, he would not communicate with his father. A great loss. John followed the offspring. That night he called Jenkins and expressed his displeasure. "What are you, a matchmaker? You're turning my son against me," he said reproachfully. "I thought you were in my position. I agree to wait while I sort out my finances, and you not only started to beat your pennies out of me, but also David against me. I didn't expect that kind of meanness." The conversation was on speakerphone. Sebastian was fiddling with a word at the moment of the call and his hands were dirty. David, hearing his father's complaints, was lazy. "How can you have a conscience?" he shouted into the phone. "You're a liar and a cheat. We'll sue you in court, you say," snorted John. Son against father. But sue over laughing lawyers. And he disconnected. "Uncle Sebastian, I think you should really file a complaint against him," David said in a passionate voice. "He won't give the money back in kind." "David, what's the point of all this squabbling?" Jenkins said sadly. "You and your father are going to get in trouble. Honestly, I don't want anything to do with him." After that, he left David with a thread to play on our nerves. "Lied to your eyes. Deprived you of your savings. He thought I might lose my beloved wife after such tricks. What are you doing with Miranda? You won't let me in the door. Like hell you wouldn't." He didn't care. "I don't want anything to do with him." After that, "Don't get hot, David, don't get hot," Sebastian reassured him. Not sure what else to say, but his son-in-law had already decided to act. The firm where David worked as an engineer had a legal department. He went there, described his situation to the staff, and asked them to recommend a good lawyer who could help his family recover a debt from his ex-family. "In principle, I could do it," said one of the trust employees, Charles, thoughtfully. "I've dealt with similar situations before, but I'd have to talk to yours first. I could do it today," the guy said cheerfully. "Just Charles, if you need anything. You work for my father-in-law for free. As a friendship, so to speak, and we'll settle the fee issue separately, if we win the case or even bring the court costs from the defendant." "Don't worry," smiled the lawyer, "but I accept the deal. You don't want to worry the old people." "So, they are already worried," sighed David. Charles did not spend too long talking to Jenkins. First of all, he clarified for himself how Sebastian had made the payment on David's loan to his father. When he found out that the money was transferred directly to the mortgage account from Sebastian's card, he was happy. "That's great," he exclaimed. "This is direct evidence that you transferred funds to the defendant. And not just for nothing, but for specific purposes. Receipts of transfers prove that you participated in the purchase of his apartment, so you're entitled to a share of the sale. Print them out for me, please." Sebastian was hesitant to sue his son-in-law's father. It seemed awkward to him, but his wife and David convinced him. And the man that same evening, with the help of Charles, wrote a pre-trial complaint to John. The document was sent by registered mail, but there was no response from the city. Then Sebastian, again with the assistance of a lawyer, wrote a statement of claim. To it, they enclosed copies of documents on the apartment and the extract from Roserister, found in the network Miranda, and receipts for transfers, and a copy of the claim and a receipt for sending it. The lawyer took all these papers to the district court the next day. Additionally, David attached to the package of documents a flash drive with audio recording of his conversation with his father voice recorder in his phone. He then turned it on just in case. Knowing the character of John, he could agree to something, and a date later refused to retract his words. The guy thought the recording would help him avoid that. He didn't even think about a trial at that time. But the audio came in handy. Charles said it would be another argument in Jenkins' favor. The trial took several months and cost the family a lot of heartache. Kelly and John regularly called the Jenkinses and asked them to settle the case amicably. They offered to wait. They threatened, tried to scandalize. But Sebastian and Miranda were adamant, although the elderly woman often had to take sedatives after such calls. They upset her too much. Miranda was too worried that she couldn't see the true nature of her new relatives in time. "Mom, why were you soothing her? Robert, you're not a psychic after all. How could you have known there was so much dirt in them?" "Exactly. David, I've been around them for years, and I didn't expect this kind of meanness. They're my parents." "You don't understand," Jenkins joked. "This is a big professional setback for me. I'm a psychologist with a long experience, with a doctorate. And it's unthinkable to misjudge people like this. Psychologist, you've been exhorting on the job. And outside of work, you're an ordinary woman. And like every human being, you have the right to make a mistake. So give yourself permission to exercise it." Miranda nodded, agreed. But each subsequent call threw her off balance. Not for nothing. Oh, not for nothing. She'd been so worried before her first visit for the city's scarecrow of heart to their home. She thought, but all things must come to an end. So did litigation. The Jenkins won the battle. The court ordered John to pay the full amount Sebastian spent on his loan, plus legal fees. It took some more time to fight with the bailiffs, who were supposed to collect the money and return it to its rightful owners. David was already at war with this service. Sebastian had no time to bother the bailiffs on a daily basis, and his health no longer allowed him to perform such active and energetic actions. So David appointed himself the legal representative of his father-in-law. 3 months passed after the court decision came into legal force. When the money finally arrived in the Jenkins account, the message about the deposit was read to Sebastian at dinner and was greeted with applause by the family. "I checked at the bank office, and everything is indeed in order," the man said. "And I was thinking, since we have such a sum, and you have some savings, should we not get involved in the mortgage again? Only now we're going to do it by the book. Miranda and I will give you a down payment. You'll make more of your own, won't you? You'll be able to buy a 2-bedroom. Not as luxurious as in that new building, but quite decent. After all, a young family should live in their own home. Is that what you wanted?" To be honest, Sebastian hesitantly began David, "we didn't really want to sit around. It was Aunt Kelly who gave me a headache, a vacation, and I'm so into this new apartment. But I actually like it better at home. I'm used to it. And so is David. Not if we're disturbing you." "What are you? Lisa?" Miranda exclaimed. "You're not disturbing us at all, but it's for your convenience." The young couple looked at each other, and there was a certain cunning in their glances. "But if it's for our convenience," said Lisa in a slightly strained voice, "then hold on. For our convenience, it would be better not to move out, but to live together with you, because David and I are going to have a child soon, and we are counting on your help with him." She looked at the changed face of her parents and added in the tone of a mom, "Well, please, I'm afraid that I won't be able to cope with the baby alone." "What's the conversation about?" Lisa Sebastian was glowing with happiness. "We'll help you with your grandson. Don't worry. The mother will refuse. I'm still good for something. Why would I refuse?" Miranda smiled. "I'm very much in favor. I'm not used to staying awake at night at the bedside of my loved ones. Just Lisa, for God's sake. Don't send the father to register the baby, and don't send David either. Just in case. Believe me, in my experience, it's a matter for the mother to handle on her own."